So, let me tell you about the time I almost died from something completely stupid, sitting on the couch. Yeah, you read that right. Sitting on the couch. You think you're safe just chilling at home, minding your own business? Think again. Sometimes your body has other plans. It started on a lazy Sunday afternoon. I'd been binge watching TV for hours. Nothing special, just zoning out on the couch, scrolling through my phone, and occasionally shoveling chips into my face. Classic weekend behavior. I've been sitting cross-legged the entire time because, that's just how I get comfortable. What I didn't realize was that sitting like that for too long was about to turn into a very bad decision. At some point, I decided to get up and grab more snacks. I swung my legs off the couch and tried to stand, and that's when it happened. My right leg was completely dead. I mean, totally numb. Not the normal pins and needles, I sat on it funny, kind of numb. It was like my entire leg just wasn't there. No feeling, no strength, nothing. So, naturally, I tried to stand anyway because I'm an idiot. Big mistake. The second I put weight on that leg, it gave out, and I went down like a sack of potatoes. I didn't even have time to catch myself. My body just folded, and I slammed down hard on the floor, right on my side. But here's the kicker. When I hit the ground, I twisted in such a way that I felt this pop in my calf. Instantly, I knew something was wrong. I was lying there on the carpet, clutching my leg, waiting for the pain to hit. And when it did, it hit hard. I tried to move, but my calf muscle was cramping like someone had taken a wrench and twisted it into a knot. I've never felt anything like it. It was like my entire leg had turned into a solid block of pain. I couldn't straighten it, I couldn't flex it, I couldn't even wiggle my toes without feeling like my leg was on fire. I figured it was just a cramp at first. No big deal, right? I'd stretch it out, maybe drink some water, and it'd go away. But then something weird started happening. My foot started to turn purple. I kid you not, it looked like someone had dipped it in grape Kool-Aid. That's when the panic set in. I knew this wasn't just some normal cramp. I tried massaging it, thinking that might help, but the more I touched it, the worse it got. The pain was spreading up my leg, and I was starting to feel weird, like I couldn't catch my breath. My heart was racing, and I had this sudden, horrible thought. What if this is a blood clot? I remembered reading somewhere that sitting too long can cause deep vein thrombosis, DVT, where a clot forms in your leg and can travel to your lungs or heart. And once that happens, game over. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to Google blood clot symptoms while in the middle of what you think might be a medical emergency. But let me tell you, it does not help. Every article I read basically said the same thing. If you think you have a clot, go to the ER immediately because if it moves to your lungs, you'll be dead in minutes. That was all I needed to hear. I grabbed my phone and called 911, which, by the way, is the most surreal experience when you're sitting there thinking, is this really happening right now? Am I about to die on my living room floor because I sat cross-legged for too long? The paramedics showed up pretty fast, and they took one look at my leg and immediately got to work. They wrapped it in some kind of compression bandage and told me they were taking me to the hospital to rule out a clot. Let me tell you, nothing humbles you faster than being carried out of your own house on a stretcher, knowing full well that your body betrayed you over a marathon TV session. At the hospital, they ran a bunch of tests, ultrasounds, blood work, the whole 9 yards. And the whole time I'm lying there thinking, this is it. This is how I die. The doctor's going to come in and tell me there's a clot, and I'm going to keel over right here on the gurney. Thankfully, the test came back clear, no clot. But that didn't mean I was in the clear. Turns out, I compressed the nerves and blood vessels in my leg from sitting cross-legged for so long, which had caused something called compartment syndrome. Basically, the blood flow to my calf had been cut off, and the muscle was starting to swell inside the surrounding tissue like it was suffocating. If the swelling had gotten worse, it could have cut off circulation completely and killed the tissue. In extreme cases, they have to perform emergency surgery to release the pressure, or, worst case scenario, amputate the limb. Yeah, all that from sitting on the couch. Luckily, I didn't need surgery, but I did need a few days in the hospital for monitoring and medication to help reduce the swelling. They told me if I hadn't called 911 when I did, things could have gone south fast. A couple more hours and I might have lost a leg entirely, or worse, had a clot form while I was still lying there clueless. So, here's the moral of the story. Don't sit in one position for too long. It sounds ridiculous, but it's real. Deep vein thrombosis and compartment syndrome aren't just things that happen to old people or long-haul truckers. They can happen to anyone, even healthy people binge-watching TV on a lazy Sunday. Now, every time I sit down for more than 20 minutes, I stretch my legs like a maniac. I've also banned myself from sitting cross-legged on the couch ever again. It's not worth the risk. People think the danger is out there in the world, on the road, in the ocean, wherever, but sometimes it's right there in your own living room, waiting for you to get a little too comfortable. So yeah, if you're sitting right now, stand up, stretch, walk around a bit. Trust me, it's not worth ending up in the ER with a leg that looks like a purple sausage and a medical bill you'll be paying off until the apocalypse. Stay safe, people, and maybe rethink your Netflix marathons while you're at it. This happened about 3 years ago, and it's haunted me ever since. I've told the story a couple of times, but only to close friends, and even then, I can tell they don't really believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't believe me either if I hadn't lived through it. It still feels surreal, like a half-forgotten nightmare that crawls back into my brain when I'm lying awake at night. It was late summer, and I was on a solo road trip across the country. I'd just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years, quit my miserable office job, and decided I needed to hit the reset button on my life. There was something about the open road that sounded like the perfect escape, and I thought, why not? I packed up my car, mapped out a vague route with stops at national parks and small towns, and hit the road with no real plan other than to keep driving until I felt better. One night, about a week into the trip, I found myself somewhere in the middle of Utah. I'd been driving all day, and by the time the sun started setting, I realized I was nowhere near any major town or motel. The sky was a brilliant orange, the kind of sunset that feels like a painting, but all it did was remind me that I had no idea where I was going to sleep that night. Eventually, I spotted a sign for a campsite just off the highway, tucked into a state park. It wasn't ideal, but I figured I'd camp for the night and get back on the road early the next morning. I followed the narrow road off the highway, winding through thick patches of forest until I reached the campground. It was almost dark by the time I parked, and I realized, to my surprise, that the place was completely empty. No other cars, no tents, nothing. Just me and the trees. It felt a little eerie being alone in a place like that, but I brushed it off. I was exhausted, and honestly, I kind of liked the idea of having the whole place to myself. I set up my tent, made a quick dinner on my little camp stove, and sat by the fire for a while, listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, in a lonely sort of way. By the time the fire started dying down, I was ready to crash. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the sleeping bag, and closed my eyes, expecting to fall asleep right away. But I didn't. Instead, I lay there, wide awake, staring at the roof of the tent as that strange sense of unease started creeping in. At first, I tried to ignore it. It was just a quiet playing tricks on my mind, right? I was out in the wilderness, far from anyone or anything. Of course, it would feel a little weird. But as the minutes dragged on, the unease grew into something heavier. It felt like the air inside the tent had thickened, like I wasn't alone anymore. Then I heard it. At first, it was faint, just the soft crunch of footsteps coming from somewhere outside my tent. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear over the sound of my own breathing. The steps were slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there didn't want to be heard, but wasn't quite trying to stay hidden either. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon, but something about the rhythm of the steps felt wrong. Too heavy to be a small animal, too slow and steady to be a deer spooking through the woods. I lay perfectly still, listening, as the footsteps circled around my tent. Once, then twice. Each time, they stopped just outside, lingering there for a moment before continuing. My skin prickled with cold sweat. Whoever was out there wasn't just passing by. They were circling me, watching me. I wanted to reach for my phone, but I knew it was pointless. No service. I thought about grabbing the knife from my pack, but it was in the front pocket, and I didn't dare move. So, I just lay there, heart racing, trying to convince myself that this wasn't happening. The footsteps stopped directly in front of the tent. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for something to happen. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing, just silence, heavy and suffocating. And then, slowly, the zipper on the tent door began to slide down. I've never felt fear like that in my life. I couldn't even scream. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but my body refused to move. I just lay there, paralyzed, as the zipper continued to open, inch by inch, the cold night air creeping inside the tent. Then it stopped. The zipper didn't open all the way. It stopped about halfway down, leaving just a small gap in the fabric. I stared at that gap, waiting to see what would happen next, my heart thundering in my ears. But nothing happened. No hand reached inside. No face appeared in the opening. Just the darkness beyond the tent flap, as silent and still as the grave. And then, just as slowly as it had started, the zipper began to slide back up. It moved smoothly, soundlessly, until the tent was closed again, as if nothing had ever happened. I lay there, too terrified to move for what felt like hours. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight was filtering through the trees, and the world outside looked normal, peaceful. But the weirdest part? The zipper on my tent was fully closed, exactly the way I'd left it the night before. There were no signs that anyone had been there, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. Just me, my tent, and the forest. I packed up and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I didn't even bother making coffee or eating breakfast. I drove for hours, not stopping until I was well out of the park and back on the highway. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it really was just an animal, and my brain twisted it into something worse in the dark. Or maybe someone was out there, watching me, playing with me. I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes, when I'm camping or even just lying in bed at night, I'll hear the sound of a zipper in my mind, and I can't help but wonder if, one day, it'll stop halfway again, and not zip back up. I've tried to bury this, but every now and then, it creeps back up, gnawing at me like an itch I can't scratch. I don't talk about it, not to my friends, not to anyone until now. Maybe sharing it here will make it easier to carry. This happened about a year ago. I was 25 in a pretty dark place after a bad breakup. My ex and I had been together for 3 years, and when it ended, I was left in that weird limbo-like state where nothing feels real. My best friend, Alex, was the only person keeping me sane during that time. He had my back through everything, and his family had always been like a second family to me. I spent so much time at his place growing up that his mom, Claire, practically knew me better than my own parents did. Claire wasn't like most of the moms I knew. She was a single mom. Alex's dad left when we were kids, and she had raised Alex and his little sister on her own. She was tough, funny, and somehow always managed to make it all look easy. Claire was also, well, gorgeous. Even as teenagers, we all noticed. She had this natural beauty, the kind that made her look effortlessly attractive no matter what she wore. But she was always just Alex's mom to me. Nothing more. At least that's what I thought. Then everything changed. It was the middle of winter, and Alex invited me to stay the weekend at his mom's house since my apartment was freezing from a busted heater. He'd just gotten engaged and wanted me to meet his fiancée that weekend too, so it all kind of lined up. We spent most of the weekend drinking beers, catching up, and reminiscing about old times. It was nice. Felt like things were back to normal after everything that had happened with my ex. The weird part? Alex had to leave early Sunday morning because his fiancée's parents wanted to take them out to brunch to celebrate the engagement. I figured I'd sleep in and head out later, but Claire insisted I stay for breakfast before I left. "It's been too long since we've really talked," she said, flashing me that warm, motherly smile that had always made me feel at home. So I stayed. We ate pancakes in the kitchen, and I swear at first it was just normal. Just two people catching up. She asked me about work, how I was doing after the breakup, all the usual stuff. But then somewhere along the way, things shifted. She poured us both a second cup of coffee and sat down a little closer than usual. I remember her asking me if I was really okay, and I told her the truth, that I wasn't, that I felt lost. She reached over and squeezed my hand, and for a moment, it felt nice, comforting, like someone actually cared. But then her hand lingered there, just a little too long, and everything changed in an instant. "I know how hard it is," she said softly, her thumb brushing over the back of my hand. "Being alone." I don't know what it was, the way she said it, the look in her eyes, but suddenly the air between us felt heavier, charged with something I didn't understand. I knew, deep down, that I needed to leave, that staying even 1 second longer was a mistake. But I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart pounding, waiting for something. Then she kissed me. It was quick, like she was testing the waters, seeing if I'd pull away. I didn't. I kissed her back. I don't know if it was the loneliness or the confusion or the years of knowing her and feeling safe around her, but whatever it was, it made me forget everything else. In that moment, Claire wasn't Alex's mom. She was just a beautiful woman sitting across from me, and I wanted her. Things escalated fast. One kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, we were making out in the kitchen like two teenagers who couldn't keep their hands off each other. I kept telling myself to stop, that this was wrong on every level, but I couldn't. We ended up stumbling to the living room, clothes half off, and things went further than they ever should have. It was intense, messy, and afterward, when we were lying on the couch, reality hit me like a brick to the face. I had just slept with my best friend's mom. My head was spinning, and all I could think about was how badly I'd screwed up. Claire seemed calm about it. Too calm, like this wasn't a big deal. "It doesn't have to change anything," she said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "We're both adults." But it did change everything. I knew it in my gut. I couldn't pretend like it hadn't happened, and I definitely couldn't pretend like it didn't matter. I mumbled some excuse about needing to leave, threw on my clothes, and bolted out of the house. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it was a one-time mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But Claire didn't seem to see it that way. She texted me a couple of times after that, asking how I was doing, if I wanted to come by and talk. I knew what she meant, and the worst part? I wanted to. I kept telling myself I'd say no, that I'd put an end to it before it got out of hand. But every time she texted, I caved. It became this secret thing between us, sneaking around, meeting whenever Alex wasn't around. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. It wasn't like we were hurting anyone, right? But the guilt ate away at me every time I saw Alex. He was one of the few people in my life I actually cared about, and here I was, betraying him in the worst way possible. It all blew up about 3 months later. Alex came over to my place one day, unannounced. I was in the middle of texting Claire, and like an idiot, I left my phone on the couch when I went to grab us some beers. When I came back, he was standing there holding my phone, reading the messages. The look on his face broke me. He didn't yell. He didn't even say anything at first. He just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Is this real?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried to explain, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like, but what was the point? It was exactly what it looked like. I'd been hooking up with his mom behind his back for months, and there was no coming back from that. He left without another word, and that was the last time we spoke. He blocked me on everything, cut me out of his life completely. I don't blame him. If the roles were reversed, I would have done the same. Claire tried to reach out a few times after that, but I ignored her. The whole thing was too messy, too complicated. I couldn't keep going down that road, not after what it cost me. It's been a year now, and I still think about it sometimes. How easily everything fell apart, how one stupid decision wrecked everything. I lost my best friend, someone I thought I'd have in my life forever, all because I couldn't control myself. So yeah, that's my story. It's not one I'm proud of, but it happened, and I have to live with it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some mistakes leave scars you can't see, but they're just as real, and no amount of regret can ever make them go away. This happened last winter when I was driving home from my girlfriend's place late at night. It was one of those nights where the snow had been coming down all day, and by the time I left her place around midnight, the roads were a mess. It wasn't a long drive, maybe 30 minutes on the highway, but with the snow coming down hard, it was going to take a bit longer. I threw on some music, cranked the heat, and tried to convince myself the drive wouldn't be that bad. The first part of the drive was fine. The highway was almost empty, and the snow was thick, but manageable. I kept my speed down and tried to stay relaxed. But after about 15 minutes, things started to get weird. There's a stretch of road on the way home that cuts through a forested area. No lights, no exits, just trees and snow on both sides. It's the kind of road where your high beams barely make a dent in the darkness. And once you're on it, there's no place to pull over. Just keep driving and hope you don't hit a deer or slide off the road. I was maybe 5 miles into this stretch when I saw something strange. Hazard lights blinking up ahead in the snow. At first, I thought it was someone who'd skidded off the road or gotten stuck, so I slowed down as I got closer. The car was pulled over on the shoulder, its front wheels halfway buried in snow, and the driver's side door was wide open. There was no one inside. I pulled up alongside the car and rolled down my window just a bit, squinting through the falling snow. "Hey, you need help?" I called out. Nothing, just the steady blink of the hazard lights and the sound of the wind howling through the trees. Something about the whole scene felt wrong. The door was open, the engine was still running, and there were footprints in the snow leading away from the car, heading into the woods. I should have just kept driving, but I couldn't help it. What if someone was hurt? What if they'd gotten disoriented and wandered off? Against every instinct I had, I put the car in park, grabbed my phone, and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit me like a slap to the face, and the wind was sharp enough to cut through my jacket. I stood by the abandoned car for a moment, shining my phone flashlight toward the woods, following the tracks. The footprints were strange, uneven, like whoever had made them was limping or dragging one leg. They led straight into the trees, vanishing into the dark. I stood there for a second, weighing my options. Every part of me was screaming to get back in the car and drive, but there was this nagging thought in the back of my mind. What if someone was in trouble? I took a few steps toward the tree line, just far enough to see if I could spot anything. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the wind. "Are you okay?" That's when I heard it movement. Something was moving in the trees, just beyond the edge of my light. At first, I thought it was the person from the car, but then I realized the sound wasn't quite right. It wasn't footsteps, it was more like shuffling. Slow, deliberate, and heavy, like something dragging through the snow. "Hey!" I called out again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" The movement stopped. For a moment, everything went dead silent. No wind, no rustling, nothing. Just the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard the faintest sound, a low, rasping breath. I froze. It wasn't the kind of sound a person makes. It was rough, guttural, like someone or something struggling to breathe. My whole body went cold, and not just from the snow. That sound hit me right in the gut, like a warning. I turned on my heel and sprinted back to my car, slipping and stumbling through the snow. My heart was racing, and my hands fumbled with the door handle. Panic setting in as I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat there for a second, trying to catch my breath. I looked back at the abandoned car, its hazard lights still blinking steadily in the dark. The footprints in the snow were still there, leading into the trees, and then I saw it. Something was moving at the edge of the woods. Just a shape, a shadow, stepping out of the trees, barely visible in the glow of my headlights. It was tall and hunched, its limbs awkward and jerky, like it didn't quite know how to walk. And then it stopped, just stood there at the edge of the road, staring at me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking right at me. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I threw the car into drive and hit the gas, my tires spinning for a second in the snow before catching. The road blurred beneath me as I sped away, my heart pounding in my ears, adrenaline surging through my veins. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following me. When I finally made it home, I sat in the driveway for a good 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. That thing, whatever it was, had been real. The next day, I checked the local news to see if anyone had reported an abandoned car on the highway, but there was nothing. No accidents, no missing persons, no reports of a stranded vehicle. It was like the whole thing had never happened. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone in bad weather. I don't know what I saw, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I trusted my gut, and it got me out of there. Whatever was in those woods, it wasn't human. For the past 5 years, I've been stealing little things from my friends and family. Nothing big, just small, random objects. And the worst part is, I don't even know why I do it. It started as an impulse, and now it feels like something I can't stop, even though it makes me feel sick with guilt. It started with a stupid bracelet. One of my friends, let's call her Jenny, left it at my place after a movie night. It wasn't anything special, just one of those cheap beaded bracelets you can buy at a flea market. I don't know what came over me, but instead of texting her about it, I slipped it into my drawer and pretended I never saw it. When she asked if she left it at my place, I said no. I remember the way she furrowed her brow, clearly confused, and I just shrugged it off, hoping she'd forget about it. And she did, but I didn't. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was, how quickly the lie came out, and how much of a rush I got from it. I didn't need the bracelet, and honestly, I didn't even want it. It just felt good to know I could take something, hide it, and no one would know. After that, the habit started to snowball. Whenever I was at a friend's house or hanging out with family, I'd casually look around for something small I could pocket. I never took anything valuable, just little things. A lighter from a friend's kitchen, a single sock from my sister's laundry basket, a keychain off my roommate's desk, random stuff that had no real meaning or worth. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. I wasn't stealing money or jewelry, just things people wouldn't miss or would assume they misplaced. And for a while, it felt harmless, almost like a weird game I was playing with myself. How small could I go? How long could I keep doing it without getting caught? But then things got out of hand. A few years ago, I was at my best friend's apartment, helping her pack for a weekend trip. While she was in the other room, I saw a photo booth picture tucked under a candle on her dresser. It was a picture of the two of us, taken at some party years ago. I don't know what possessed me, but I slipped it into my pocket. It was impulsive, like I didn't even have time to think it through. But as soon as I did it, I felt this weird mix of satisfaction and dread. She was my best friend, and I just stole something that actually meant something to her. She noticed. Of course she did. A few days later, she texted me asking if I'd seen the photo because she wanted to put it in a scrapbook. I lied, told her I had no idea where it went. She sounded sad, but she didn't push it. And I just sat there, staring at the photo I'd stolen, feeling like the worst person in the world. I wish I could say that was the moment I stopped, but it wasn't. The stealing became a habit, almost like a compulsion. I started hoarding all the little things I took: ticket stubs, pens, buttons, a single playing card, even an old pair of earbuds I found under a couch cushion. I have a shoebox full of all the stuff I've taken over the years, tucked away in the back of my closet like some twisted little trophy collection. Sometimes I open it just to look at everything, and it makes me feel, I don't know, guilty, ashamed, but also weirdly proud. It's hard to explain. I'll try to figure out why I do it. I've never stolen from a store or a stranger, only from people I know. It's not like I need these things or that I even enjoy having them. If anything, they make me feel worse. But every time I think about stopping, I get this strange anxiety, like I'm afraid of what will happen if I stop. It's like the habit has become part of who I am, and without it, I don't know what I'd do. The closest I ever came to getting caught was last Christmas. I was at my parents' house, and my mom had just gotten this new candle that she was really excited about. It was one of those expensive ones that smell like a forest or some crap like that. While she was cooking dinner, I took the lid off the candle and slipped it into my pocket. I don't even know why. I mean, what the hell am I supposed to do with a candle lid? But it felt like I had to take it, like some invisible force was telling me to. The next day, my mom asked if I'd seen the lid. She was upset, saying she couldn't believe it had gone missing so quickly. I almost cracked right then and there. I could feel the words rising in my throat, ready to confess. But instead, I just shook my head and said, "Sorry, Mom. I haven't seen it." She looked so confused, so hurt that something had gone missing in her own house, and I hated myself for lying. I wanted to give it back, but at that point, how could I? How do you return a stolen candle lid without looking completely insane? I know I need to stop. I've thought about throwing the whole shoebox away, just dumping everything in the trash and pretending none of it ever happened. But every time I try, I freeze. I tell myself, one more time, just one more thing, and then I'll stop for good. But I never do. I don't even know who I am anymore. Am I just a thief? A kleptomaniac? Or is it something deeper? Some need for control or attention that I don't know how to express any other way. I wish I could talk to someone about it. But how do you admit to something like this? Hey, by the way, I've been stealing random crap from you for years. Hope that's cool. Yeah, right? So, I keep it to myself. I keep stealing. I keep lying. And every time I take something, I feel that same rush followed by the same crushing guilt. It's a cycle I don't know how to break, but I have to. Someday, I know this will catch up to me, and when it does, it's going to blow everything apart. My friends, my family, they'll never look at me the same, and I don't blame them. Until then, I'll keep pretending everything is fine. I'll keep smiling, keep playing the part of the reliable friend, the good daughter, and I'll keep stealing, because for now, it's the only thing I know how to do. I always thought of déjà vu as just a weird brain glitch. Like your mind misfires for a second and tricks you into thinking you've experienced something before. But what if it's more than that? What if it's not a glitch at all, but a warning? Something telling you that reality isn't what it seems? I didn't think much of it, until the night I realized I was living the same moment over and over again. It started on a random Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted, and made myself a quick dinner. It was one of those nights where I had no energy to do anything, so I sat on the couch, scrolled through my phone, and put on some mindless TV. Everything felt normal until I looked at the clock. 9:03 p.m. I remember that exact time because I thought, wow, it's not even that late and I'm already this tired. I checked my phone again, and sure enough, 9:03. I went back to watching TV, figuring I'd zone out for a bit and then head to bed. A few minutes later, I glanced at the clock again. 9:03 p.m. I stared at it for a second, thinking maybe the battery had died, but my phone also said 9:03. I shook it off, thinking it was just some weird glitch, but something about it unsettled me. Time wasn't supposed to behave like that. I sat there for what felt like 10, maybe 15 minutes, waiting for the clock to change. But it didn't. The second hand didn't move. The numbers didn't change. It stayed frozen on 9:03 p.m. I stood up, thinking maybe I needed to reset the clock. But when I did, something strange happened. The TV skipped back a few seconds. It was a commercial I just watched, playing again like a loop. My heart started racing. I tried changing the channel, but every time I switched to a new station, the same few seconds of that same commercial played, over and over. At this point, I was starting to panic. I grabbed my phone to check the time again, and it still said 9:03 p.m. But here's the thing. Notifications I'd already cleared were suddenly back on the screen, like they'd never been opened. It was like my phone had reset to an earlier point, but only for a moment in time. And then everything flickered. It was like the lights dimmed just for a split second, and when they came back on, I was sitting back on the couch, exactly where I'd been a few minutes earlier. My dinner was untouched on the coffee table. The TV was playing the same show I'd been watching, as if nothing had happened. But the clock still said 9:03 p.m. I tried to tell myself it was just some strange form of déjà vu, that maybe I'd fallen asleep without realizing it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake, and I was stuck. I stood up again, heart pounding, and everything happened exactly the same way. The TV glitched, playing the same commercial. My phone buzzed with the same notifications. The clock refused to move. And then, like before, the lights flickered, and I was back on the couch. This happened over and over. I must have lived through that same loop a dozen times, maybe more. Each time, I tried doing something different, leaving the room, turning off the TV, restarting my phone, but nothing worked. No matter what I did, the loop reset, and I found myself back on the couch with the clock frozen at 9:03 p.m. I don't know how long it went on. It felt like hours, but the clock never moved. I started to wonder if I was stuck in some kind of time trap, like one of those stories where people get caught in a time loop and have to figure out how to escape. But nothing I did made any difference. Every time the loop reset, it felt like the world was mocking me, like I was a character in a broken video game, replaying the same level over and over with no way out. Then, something changed. During what felt like my 100th loop, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the corner of the room, just barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. It wasn't there before. I was sure of that. It was tall, humanoid, but somehow wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, like it didn't quite know how to exist in this space. And it was watching me. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. The The thing didn't move. It just stood there, silently observing me, like it was waiting for something. My skin prickled with fear. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure was gone, and the loop reset again. Back to the couch. Back to the clock reading 9:03 p.m. This time, I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen in fear, waiting to see if the figure would come back. But it didn't. Instead, the lights flickered again, and for the first time all night, the clock changed. 9:04 p.m. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd finally escaped whatever nightmare I'd been trapped in. But even now, I'm not sure if I really escaped, or if the loop just ended, for reasons I'll never understand. Since that night, I've been terrified of checking the time. Every time I glance at a clock, I feel that same knot of anxiety tighten in my chest, afraid it'll show 9:03 p.m. and I'll be right back where I started. I don't know what caused the loop, or what that thing I saw was. All I know is that for those endless moments, I was stuck outside of time, and something was watching me the entire time. Whatever it was, I hope to God it never finds me again. It's strange how betrayal doesn't hit all at once. It sneaks in slowly, like fog creeping through an open window. You notice little things at first, but you convince yourself they're nothing. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, that you're making a big deal out of nothing. That's what I did, over and over again. We had been together for 3 years. I wasn't naive enough to think we were perfect, but I thought we were solid. We lived together, shared bills, had inside jokes no one else would understand, and spent lazy Sunday mornings binge-watching crime documentaries. I thought we were a team. Turns out I was playing the game alone. It started small. His mood shifted, subtle at first, but noticeable if you knew him well, and I thought I did. He became easily irritated by things that never used to bother him. If I asked him how his day was, I'd get short, dismissive answers. Little fights that used to blow over quickly turned into full-blown arguments. At the time, I thought we're just going through a rough patch. Every couple has those, right? But then came the phone. Ah, yes, the phone. It's always the phone, isn't it? He used to be so casual with it, leaving it out on the table, handing it to me to respond to texts while he cooked. But one day, that changed. He started keeping it close, glued to his side like a lifeline. It was always on silent, and it never left his pocket. If I asked who was texting, his answers were vague. Oh, just work stuff, or it's nothing important. One night, we were watching a movie, and his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Out of habit, I glanced over, but before I could even register what I saw, he snatched it up like it was on fire. I remember laughing, trying to make light of it. Geez, what are you hiding? State secrets? He gave me this tight, awkward smile and said, No, just work. But the way he said it didn't sit right with me. It was too quick, too practiced. Something inside me shifted. That little voice in the back of my head whispered, This isn't just work. A few weeks later, he started going to the gym. Now, don't get me wrong, I thought it was great that he wanted to get in shape. But the guy had never cared about working out before. Suddenly, he was going every day, even after long shifts at work. He started buying new clothes too, stuff that was way fancier than what he usually wore. I try not to read too much into it. People change, right? Maybe he just wanted to feel good about himself. But then the gym sessions got longer. He'd come home late, sweaty but smelling faintly like cologne. Not his cologne. I asked him once, Who are you trying to impress? He rolled his eyes. No one. I just want to look good. Is that a crime? It wasn't a crime, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The late nights started piling up too. At first, he'd tell me it was work stuff. I have to finish this project, or the team's grabbing drinks after hours. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But then one Friday night, he told me he was going out with co-workers and wouldn't be home until late. He kissed me on the forehead and said, Don't wait up. I tried to sleep that night, but something kept gnawing at me. I stared at the ceiling for hours, the uneasy feeling in my gut growing stronger with every passing minute. Around midnight, I gave into the nagging thought and checked his location on my phone. We'd shared our locations for safety reasons years ago, and I had never felt the need to check before. But tonight felt different. He wasn't at the bar he said he'd be at. His location showed him at an apartment complex across town. My stomach dropped. I sat there, staring at the screen, hoping it was some kind of glitch. Maybe his phone had pinged the wrong place. Maybe he was at the bar, and it just didn't show up correctly. But deep down, I knew the truth. I could feel it cold and heavy in my chest. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I waited. When he came home at 3 a.m., I pretended to be asleep. He slipped in a bed next to me, reeking of perfume. I lay there, my heart pounding in my ears, wondering how the hell we had gotten here. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking as I typed in the passcode. It was the same one he'd always used, almost like he wanted me to find out. And there it was. Texts, photos, plans. He'd been seeing someone else for months. Months. All the while, I'd been here, thinking we were just going through a rough patch. I scrolled through the messages, numb to everything except the undeniable truth staring back at me. There were conversations about their nights together, jokes about me, like I was some clueless fool, and promises to meet again. I sat there, frozen, until I heard the water turn off in the bathroom. Panic gripped me, but I couldn't let him get away with it. Not this time. When he walked into the bedroom, towel draped over his shoulders, I held up his phone. "How long?" I asked, my voice low and steady. His face paled. He opened his mouth to lie, to deny, but I cut him off. "Don't. Just tell me how long." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It didn't mean anything," he mumbled, like that would somehow make it better. "It's not serious." I laughed, this bitter, ugly sound I didn't even recognize. "Not serious?" I repeated. "You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, and it's not serious?" He tried to apologize, but it was too late. There was no coming back from this. I told him to leave. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just shut down. I sat there, numb, as he packed a bag and walked out the door. It took me a long time to process everything. In the weeks that followed, I kept replaying the signs in my head. The late nights, the defensiveness, the phone secrecy, the sudden changes in behavior. It was all there, clear as day, but I had ignored it because I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the person I loved, the person I trusted with everything, was capable of doing something like this. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the slow realization that I had let it happen. I had seen the signs. I had known, deep down, that something was wrong, but I chose to ignore it. I chose to believe in him, even when the truth was staring me in the face. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't let love blind you to the truth. People don't change their behavior for no reason. And if they start hiding things from you, there's a reason for it. I'm better now, but it took a long time to get here. I still think about it sometimes, how easily I was fooled, how much I wanted to believe him. But now I know better. If something doesn't feel right, I won't ignore it. Not ever again. This one's from my sophomore year, and I swear to this day, no one knows how the whole thing didn't end with the school getting shut down. It was the week leading up to Halloween, which always brought out the worst in people. There were already pranks happening all over school. Someone put a mannequin in the girls' bathroom. The seniors dumped plastic spiders in the freshman hall, and at least 3 kids got caught trying to sneak in with full Halloween masks. But none of that compared to what happened at the haunted hallway event. Okay, so every year, the school ran this haunted hallway thing where one section of the school would be transformed into a haunted house for one night. It was supposed to be a fundraiser for the student council or some club nobody cared about. The idea was simple: decorate the hallway with cobwebs, spooky props, maybe have a couple of students jump out and scare people, and charge $5 for entry. Pretty harmless stuff. But this year, things got out of control. The guy in charge of the haunted hallway was a senior named Matt, and Matt was one of those kids who always took everything way too seriously. If there was a project or event, Matt was going to make sure it went down in history. So naturally, when he got put in charge of organizing the haunted hallway, he decided to turn it into the scariest thing anyone had ever seen. His words, not mine. "If they aren't crying, I didn't do my job." That's what he kept saying. In hindsight, someone really should have stopped him. So, Matt goes all out. He brings in fog machines, strobe lights, fake blood, like gallons of it, and even recruits half the drama club to play zombies and ghosts. He set up dummies hanging from the ceiling, creepy dolls in the lockers, and this horrifying clown room with fake limbs scattered everywhere. Honestly, it was pretty impressive, but also deeply unsettling. And if it had stopped there, maybe everything would have been fine. But Matt had one more genius idea: live animals. Now, most sane people would have stopped at the fake spiders and plastic rats. Not Matt. Matt somehow managed to borrow 2 real chickens from a kid in the agriculture program. I don't know what his thought process was. Something about having real farm animals making the hallway feel more authentic. But instead of keeping them in a cage or pen, Matt just let the chickens roam free inside the haunted hallway. He figured they'd add to the atmosphere or something. Spoiler alert, they did not. The night of the event, the haunted hallway was packed. Half the school showed up, excited to walk through and get scared out of their minds. At first, everything was going smoothly. People were screaming, zombies were jumping out of closets, the fog machines were going full blast. It was exactly the kind of chaos Matt wanted. Then the chickens escaped. I don't know if they got spooked by the strobe lights or what, but halfway through the event, those chickens lost their minds. They started running through the hallway, squawking and flapping their wings, knocking over props and scattering fake limbs everywhere. At one point, one of the chickens flew straight into a group of freshmen, and I swear you'd think they were being attacked by a pterodactyl from the way they screamed. And here's where it gets worse. Remember the fog machines? Yeah, someone turned them up way too high, and soon the whole hallway was filled with this thick, suffocating fog. You couldn't see anything more than 2 feet in front of you. So now we've got panicked students, rogue chickens, strobe lights flashing like a nightclub, and absolute confusion everywhere. People started freaking out for real. Some kids thought the chickens were part of the act and were trying to grab them, but the chickens were having none of it. One of them ran headfirst into a fog machine, knocking it over, which caused it to start leaking smoke even worse. Meanwhile, the other chicken somehow managed to make its way into the clown room and perched itself on top of one of the creepy dummies. When a group of students walked in and saw a real chicken sitting on a fake clown covered in blood, one of them screamed so loud they pulled a fire alarm by accident. That's when the real chaos started. The fire alarm set off the sprinkler system. In an instant, the whole hallway was soaked. Fake blood, fog, and feathers everywhere. The kids playing zombies tried to stay in character, but they were slipping all over the floor, looking more like clumsy breakdancers than undead monsters. One of the drama club kids, dressed as a ghost, tripped and got tangled in the chicken's leash. Don't ask me why they even leashed one of the chickens. And the 2 of them went skidding across the wet floor like a scene from a cartoon. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, the power went out. The strobe lights died, the fog machines sputtered to a stop, and the entire hallway was plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. I remember standing there in the pitch-black hallway, hearing nothing but the sound of wet sneakers squelching on the floor, panicked giggles, and, of course, those damn chickens clucking like they were leading some kind of poultry uprising. It took about 10 minutes for the teachers to restore order, but it felt like a lifetime. They finally got the power back on, shut off the sprinklers, and herded everyone out of the building like we were evacuees from a natural disaster. The aftermath was legendary. The hallway looked like a war zone. Props everywhere, puddles of red water mixed with feathers, and one of the chickens was still sitting calmly on top of a clown dummy, like it had just won the whole thing. Matt? He thought the whole thing was a masterpiece. It was supposed to be terrifying, he kept saying, even as the vice principal was threatening to suspend him for life. Somehow, no one got expelled, and the chickens made it back to the farm in one piece. But the haunted hallway was canceled forever. The next day, the principal gave a long, serious speech about responsibility and appropriate school activities, which just made the whole thing even funnier. People talked about that night for years. To this day, someone always brings up the chicken incident at every reunion, and Matt still insists it was the greatest haunted house of all time. So yeah, that's the story of how 2 rogue chickens and a bunch of overenthusiastic teenagers turned a harmless school event into a full-blown disaster. And honestly, it was worth every second. Okay, so this is the story of how I almost died because of a peanut butter sandwich. No, I'm not allergic or anything. This wasn't some accidental allergic reaction kind of thing. This was just my own dumb brain trying to kill me with poor decisions and bad timing. It was a regular weekday, and I was working from home, right in the middle of back-to-back Zoom meetings. I hadn't had time to eat anything all morning, so by the time I had a 5-minute break between calls, I was starving. You know that kind of hunger where you stop thinking rationally and just shovel whatever food you can find into your face? Yeah, that was me. I ran into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and found nothing except some sad leftovers and condiments. But there, sitting on the counter like a beacon of hope, was a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Bingo! I slapped together the fastest sandwich you've ever seen. Just 2 thick slices of bread and a borderline obnoxious amount of peanut butter. No jelly, no thyme, just pure, sticky sustenance. Now, here's where things started going wrong. I took the sandwich back to my desk, unmuted myself for my next call, and in my infinite wisdom, decided it was a good idea to eat while the meeting was going on. You'd think I'd take small bites, but no. I took the biggest bite possible because apparently I'm an overachiever when it comes to sandwiches. What I failed to realize, until it was too late, was that this much peanut butter in one bite was like trying to chew a mouthful of wet cement. It instantly glued my teeth together and stuck to the roof of my mouth, turning into a dense, sticky blob that I could not swallow. I tried chewing, but it wasn't breaking down, just spreading further. At this point, I could feel my throat closing up like, nope, we're not dealing with that. So there I was, mid-Zoom call, camera on, trying to act like everything was fine, while quietly choking on the world's most poorly thought-out sandwich. I tried to take a sip of water, thinking it would help wash it down, but all it did was make the peanut butter clump even worse. It was like trying to swallow a roll of duct tape. Then it hit me. I can't breathe. I panicked and muted my mic, hoping no one on the call would notice that I was slowly suffocating in real time. I tried to cough, but nothing was coming out. My throat was so clogged with peanut butter that I couldn't get any air in or out. I could feel my face getting red, my eyes watering, and my heart pounding in my chest. At that moment, 2 thoughts crossed my mind. 1, is this really how I die? Choking on a sandwich like some kind of idiot? 2, please God, don't let my coworkers see this. I tried everything, pounding on my chest, drinking more water, even jamming my fingers into my mouth to scrape the peanut butter out, but it was stuck like cement. I knew I had only a few seconds before things went from bad to fatal. Finally, I stood up and slammed my chest into the back of my chair, hoping the awkward Heimlich maneuver would dislodge the peanut butter blob. The first time, nothing. The second time, still nothing. On the 3rd try, I hit the chair so hard that I almost tipped it over. But that's when it happened. The sticky clump finally popped loose from my throat. It didn't come out gracefully, though. It shot out of my mouth like a disgusting peanut butter bullet, straight onto my laptop. I collapsed into my chair, gasping for air, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I sat there for a good minute, just breathing and staring at the peanut butter splatter on my screen, trying to comprehend how close I'd just come to death. Meanwhile, my Zoom call was still going on. I unmuted myself just in time to hear someone ask, "Everything okay over there?" I gave them the world's most casual, "Oh yeah, just bumped my desk," like I hadn't just narrowly escaped choking to death. After the call ended, I sat there, staring at the sandwich like it was my mortal enemy. I couldn't believe that a simple snack, something I'd eaten 100 times before, had almost taken me out. If I hadn't managed to dislodge that glob of peanut butter, I'd be that guy. The one who makes it into the weird obituary section of the local news. Man dies tragically from peanut butter sandwich mishap. And here's the thing. Choking is way more common than people realize. We think of choking hazards as stuff like grapes or hot dogs for kids, but adults? We choke all the time, on food, pills, even our own saliva. One wrong bite, and it's game over. And let me tell you, there's nothing more humbling than realizing your whole existence almost ended because you were in a rush to eat a sandwich during a meeting. I learned 2 things from that experience. First, don't take massive bites of sticky food if you're in a hurry. Second, always have some kind of emergency plan for choking, especially if you live alone. I looked it up later, and apparently thousands of people choke to death every year, and most of them are adults who were just eating too fast or not paying attention. It happens so quickly that you don't even realize what's going on until it's almost too late. These days, I approach peanut butter with a whole new level of respect. I still love it, but I spread it thin and take my time. No more giant spoonfuls. No more reckless sandwiches. And if I'm eating anything remotely sticky or tricky, I make sure someone's around. Because choking is no joke. It can sneak up on you out of nowhere and take you out in seconds. So yeah, if you're reading this while eating something, slow down. Take smaller bites. And for the love of everything holy, don't eat peanut butter like it's a race. Trust me, you do not want your life flashing before your eyes over a sandwich. Stay safe, people. Even the most innocent foods can turn on you if you're not careful. Alright, so, my first day? Phew, it was an absolute roller coaster of emotions. I still laugh thinking about it because everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but somehow I made it through. Barely. If you had told me a month before that I'd be working in a strip club, I would have laughed in your face. But life, man, it throws curveballs like it's got something to prove. It started with me being completely broke. Like down to my last $20 kind of broke. I quit my last job because my boss was an insufferable prick, and the job market wasn't exactly kind to a 24-year-old with no connections and a degree in graphic design. Bills don't wait, though, and rent was looming over me like a storm cloud. I was desperate. Then one of my friends, who's always been a bit wild, casually told me she danced on weekends and pulled in more money in 2 nights than I made in a month working retail. At first, I was like, yeah, okay, but that's you. I can't do that. I wasn't exactly the most coordinated person, and my confidence was shot after months of unemployment. But the thought kept creeping into my head. What if? Could I really do it? I figured, what's the harm in trying? Worst case, I'd embarrass myself, make no money, and walk away with a funny story. Best case, I'd make enough to keep my landlord off my back. So, one day I found myself Googling local clubs and landed on one that didn't look too shady. I called ahead, and they told me to come by for an audition that same night. I almost chickened out about 5 different times that day. I mean, what the hell was I thinking? I was clumsy and broke, hardly stripper material. But something inside me was like, just go. You've got nothing to lose. I didn't have any stripper shoes or sexy outfits. So I threw on a pair of black shorts and a bikini top. I looked like I was heading to a pool party, not a strip club, but it was the best I could do. I walked into the club, heart pounding, palms sweaty, already wondering if this was the worst decision of my life. The manager was this gruff-looking woman named Gina. She had bright red lipstick, a no-nonsense vibe, and the kind of voice that told you she'd seen it all. She looked me up and down, handed me a waiver to sign, yeah, a waiver, apparently even stripping as paperwork, and told me to hit the stage for a test run. Just move to the music, she said. We're not expecting Cirque du Soleil here. I stepped out onto the stage, blinded by the neon lights and deafened by the bass-heavy music. There was only one guy sitting at the bar, nursing a beer, and I don't think he even looked up when I started. I tried to remember some of the pole moves I'd watched on YouTube earlier that day, but in reality, it was more like awkwardly holding onto the pole and hoping I wouldn't faceplant. I did a little spin and nearly toppled over. My foot caught on the stage and I stumbled hard. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I just kept moving, praying Gina wasn't regretting giving me a chance. When the music finally ended, I climbed off the stage, convinced I had just embarrassed myself beyond recovery. Gina gave me this tiny smirk and said, "You'll get better. We all suck at first." Then she told me to come back for the night shift and see how I liked it. That night? Holy shit, it was like stepping into another world. I showed up around 8 p.m., and the place was already filling up. The lights were dim, the music was loud, and there were dancers everywhere. Some of them looking like goddesses who were born to do this, others clearly just trying to make rent like me. One of the dancers, an older girl named Jade, saw me standing awkwardly in the corner of the dressing room and took me under her wing. "Don't overthink it," she said while reapplying her lipstick. "Just smile, move a little, and act confident. Confidence is 90% of this job. The other 10%? Knowing how to dodge the creeps." Great. Confidence I didn't have. Creeps I wasn't ready for. My first real interaction with a customer happened maybe an hour into my shift. Some dude in a trucker hat waved me over to his table and asked if I did lap dances. I had no idea how to respond, so I just nodded like an idiot. He handed me a wad of crumpled bills and led me over to one of the booths. My heart was racing the entire time. I kept thinking, am I doing this right? Should I say something? Do I just start dancing? I awkwardly started swaying to the music, hoping I looked even remotely sexy. The guy was super chill. Thankfully, he just sat back, smiled, and didn't try to touch me. Honestly, it felt less like a lap dance and more like an awkward slow dance at prom. But hey, he seemed happy enough. When the song ended, he handed me another $20 and said, "Not bad for your first night." That gave me a weird boost of confidence. Maybe I could do this. Of course, not every customer was as pleasant. The second guy I danced for? Total creep. He reeked of whiskey and leaned in way too close, whispering, "You look like my ex-wife." Goals. I spent the entire song dodging his hands, and the second it was over, I bolted. Gina must have seen the look on my face, because she cornered me in the dressing room after. "You good?" she asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. She gave me a knowing look. "You learn fast in this job. Don't let them get to you." By the end of the night, I was exhausted physically, emotionally, and mentally. My feet were killing me, my nerves were shot, and I felt like I'd been hit by a bus. But I made $180 in tips, which was more than I'd made in a week at my old job. As I walked out of the club with cash in my pocket, something strange hit me. I felt proud. I know that sounds weird, but after all the anxiety, the awkward moments, and the creeps, I survived. I'd done something completely out of my comfort zone and walked away with more money and more confidence than I started with. The next few nights were a blur of trial and error. Some nights were good, others were a disaster. I learned how to handle drunk customers, how to spot the ones who'd tip well, and how to dodge the weirdos. I got better at the pole, too. Nothing fancy, but at least I wasn't tripping over my feet anymore. I danced for about 8 months before I decided to move on. It wasn't a long career, but it was enough to pull me out of debt and give me a fresh start. Looking back, I don't regret it. Stripping taught me a lot about people, about boundaries, and about myself. It forced me to be confident, even when I wasn't. And yeah, it was tough sometimes, but it was also empowering in a weird way. So yeah, my first night was a mess, but it was the start of something that changed me for the better. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. This happened last winter, and it still makes my skin crawl every time I think about it. It wasn't the kind of fear that hits you all at once, like a car crash or a sudden shock. It was slow, creeping, like a spider crawling up your neck, inch by inch, until you realize too late that it's already there. It was the night after New Year's, and I was driving back to my apartment after spending the holidays at my parents' place. They live out in the suburbs, and I had a solid 2-hour drive back to the city. It had snowed the night before, so the roads were slick and most people had stayed off them. But I wanted to get home, and I figured if I drove slow, I'd be fine. About halfway through the trip, I realized I needed gas. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and I knew the highway rest stops in this part of the state were few and far between. Eventually, I saw one of those old, sketchy gas stations off an exit. One of those places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. You know the type. Flickering neon sign, a few dusty pumps, and a dark convenience store with bars over the windows. But it was either that or run out of gas in the middle of nowhere, so I pulled in. The place was deserted, as I'd expected. I parked by the pump, turned off the car, and stepped out into the freezing night. The air was dead still, no wind, no noise, just the soft crunch of my boots in the snow. The gas station was bathed in this weird yellowish light from the overhead lamps, but beyond that, everything was pitch black. The forest pressed in from all sides, making it feel like the station was floating in some endless void. I started filling up the tank, trying to shake off the weird vibe. I was just tired, I told myself. Too many late nights over the holidays. But then, as I stood there, waiting for the pump to click off, I noticed something odd. There was a car parked on the far side of the lot, just barely visible in the shadows. It looked abandoned. No lights on, no movement inside, covered in a thin layer of snow. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I couldn't explain it, but it felt wrong in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself not to be stupid. It was just an empty car, probably left there by someone who'd run out of gas and hitched a ride into town. But even as I tried to convince myself, I kept glancing at it out of the corner of my eye. There was this weird tension in the air, like the world was holding its breath. Then the pump clicked off. The sudden sound made me jump, and I laughed nervously at myself. I replaced the nozzle and hurried back to the driver's side door, eager to get back on the road. That's when I noticed something else. The car that had been parked across the lot, it wasn't there anymore. I froze, my hand on the door handle, staring at the empty spot where the car had been. My brain tried to make sense of it, but no explanation came. There was no sound of an engine starting, no headlights, no tire tracks in the fresh snow. It was just gone. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine, my heart racing in my chest. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe the car had been towed while I wasn't looking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the road ahead, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. About 5 miles down the highway, I noticed a pair of headlights behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I kept driving, the car stayed right behind me, keeping pace no matter how fast or slow I went. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone else was heading back to the city, just like me. But the longer it went on, the more uneasy I felt. The headlights never drifted too far back, and they never passed me. Just stayed there, a constant presence in my rearview mirror. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car matched my speed perfectly. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could feel the panic rising. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but the fear was real. After another mile or two, I decided to pull off at the next exit. I figured if the car followed me, I'd know something was wrong. If not, I could laugh it off and call myself an idiot. I spotted an exit sign up ahead and took it without signaling, hoping to throw the car off. But as I merged onto the off-ramp, the headlights followed. That's when I knew. My heart was in my throat as I pulled into a small rest area just off the exit. It was one of those tiny places with a couple of vending machines and a bathroom that always smelled like bleach. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and waited. The other car pulled in behind me, parking a few spaces away. The headlights shut off, leaving both of us sitting in the dark. For a long moment, nothing happened. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the silhouette of the car in my rearview mirror. My breath was fogging up the inside of the windshield, and the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. Then the driver's side door of the other car opened. A figure stepped out, tall and thin, moving slowly. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, just the vague shape of a person walking toward me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go. I turned the key in the ignition, my hands shaking, and the engine roared to life. The figure stopped, standing perfectly still, just a few feet from my car. I didn't wait to see what they were going to do. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the parking spot, then slammed it into drive and peeled out of the rest area. I didn't look back. I drove straight through the night, only stopping when I reached the city limits. I parked in front of my apartment and sat there for a long time, trying to process what had happened. But no matter how many times I replayed it in my head, I couldn't make sense of it. Whoever or whatever was in that car, they were following me, and they wanted me to know. To this day, I still think about that figure standing in the dark just a few feet from my car. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd rolled down the window, or gotten out to confront them. But I'm glad I didn't. Some things you're better off not knowing. This happened a few summers ago when I was dog-sitting for a friend who lived a little ways outside of town. She had this big, old farmhouse surrounded by acres of open land, and it was peaceful during the day, quiet, with rolling fields and a line of woods in the distance. It sounded like an easy gig. Stay at the house, feed her golden retriever, and take him on walks for a couple of days while she visited her family. Honestly, I thought it would be a nice little break from city life. But from the moment I got there, I had this weird feeling in my gut. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't anything obvious, just a low hum of discomfort, like the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a room and know something's off, even if you can't figure out what. I tried to ignore it. After all, it was just a couple of nights. How bad could it be? The first day was uneventful. I took the dog, Baxter, on a walk around the fields, played with him in the yard, and made myself dinner. But as the sun went down, the house started to feel different. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. It was something else. The air felt heavier, and the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt suffocating. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being silly. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and settled into the living room with a book. Baxter curled up next to me on the couch, and I tried to relax. The house was old, sure, but there was nothing to be afraid of. Or so I thought. Around 10 p.m., Baxter suddenly sat up, ears perked, and stared toward the front door. His whole body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Baxter was the friendliest dog I'd ever met. He never growled at anyone, not even the mailman. I put my hand on his collar and whispered, "What is it, buddy?" He didn't move. He just kept staring at the door, the growl getting deeper, his fur standing on end. And that's when I heard it, a soft knock. Not a friendly, "Hey, is anyone home?" kind of knock. No, it was slow and deliberate, like someone just tapping their knuckles against the wood, waiting for a reaction. My heart started racing. It was late, the house was in the middle of nowhere, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I crept toward the front door, keeping one hand on Baxter's collar to keep him from barking. The knock came again, exactly the same, 3 soft taps. I peeked through the peephole, but there was no one there. Just the dark outline of the porch and the fields beyond, bathed in the dim glow of the porch light. My stomach dropped. Maybe someone was messing with me? But who? And why? I backed away from the door, trying to keep my breathing steady. "It's nothing," I whispered to Baxter, trying to convince myself more than him. But he didn't relax. He kept staring at the door, his growl still low and steady, like he knew something I didn't. The knock came again, but this time it wasn't at the front door. It was at the back door. I swear to God, my whole body went cold. The back door was all the way on the other side of the house, and there was no way anyone could have moved that fast without me hearing them. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding in my chest, and texted my friend, "Hey, is anyone supposed to stop by the house tonight?" She replied almost immediately, "No." Why? I didn't want to freak her out, so I just said, "Thought I heard something outside." Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I knew it wasn't. I tried to ignore the second knock, telling myself it was probably just the wind or maybe an animal. But then it happened again, 3 soft taps, like someone gently testing the door. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and walked toward the back door, my heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. I stood by the door, gripping the knife, and listened. There was no sound except for the soft hum of the fridge behind me. I reached out slowly and flipped the porch light on. Nothing, just darkness beyond the glass, and the faint outline of the fields swaying in the breeze. And then, as I stood there, I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, just beyond the edge of the porch light, standing perfectly still. I couldn't see a face or any details, just a dark silhouette at the edge of the light. It was facing the house, unmoving, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. I froze. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the shadows or my tired mind playing games, but deep down I knew better. Someone or something was out there just standing and watching. Baxter started barking then, loud and frantic, his body pressing against the door like he was ready to charge outside. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, silent and still. And then, without warning, it turned and walked away, slowly, deliberately, disappearing into the darkness beyond the light. I didn't sleep that night. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat on the couch with the knife in my lap, waiting for morning. Baxter didn't leave my side, his ears twitching at every little noise. When the sun finally came up, I walked outside to check for footprints, but there was nothing. No tracks in the dirt, no sign that anyone had been there. It was like the figure had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know that if I hadn't listened to my gut and stayed inside, something bad would have happened. When my friend got back the next day, I told her everything. She looked shaken but tried to brush it off, saying it was probably just some weirdo passing through. But I could see it in her eyes. She didn't believe that any more than I did. I haven't been back to that farmhouse since, and I don't plan to. Sometimes your instincts know what your brain doesn't. And that night, my gut told me one thing loud and clear. Stay inside, don't open the door, and don't look back. Okay, here's the deal. I didn't exactly plan on becoming a stripper. It just sort of happened. I was 25, broke, and pretty much out of options. I just moved to a new city after a bad breakup. The kind where you leave most of your stuff behind and block their number. And I didn't know a soul. My savings? Gone. My car? A clunker held together with duct tape. And the temp job I'd picked up barely covered groceries, let alone rent. I was scrolling through Craigslist, looking for any gig that paid more than minimum wage. I ignored the weird ads, you know the kind, but then I saw this one. Dancers wanted. No experience necessary. Make $1 nightly. I stared at it for a while, hovering over the close tab button, but then I thought, what if? I mean, how bad could it really be? I already felt like a disaster. Might as well get paid, right? The next day, I showed up at the club, a dingy little spot downtown that looked half abandoned from the outside. I almost turned around right then, but rent was due in a week, and I didn't have a backup plan. I took a deep breath, adjusted my jacket, and walked in. The place looked a little better on the inside. Dim lights, velvet booths, and the faint smell of vanilla mixed with cigarette smoke. The manager, a guy named Rico, was sitting at the bar, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I approached, gave me a once-over, and said, "You here to audition?" "Yeah, I think." My voice cracked a little. Smooth start. He handed me a waiver to sign, because of course there was a waiver, and then waved toward the stage. "Pick a name," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "A name?" I blinked. I hadn't thought that far ahead. "Yeah, something catchy. Like Candy or Jade." Panic hit me. Raven. It was the first thing that popped into my head. I'd never even met a Raven in real life, but it sounded mysterious enough. Rico just shrugged. "Works for me. Get up there." Music starting. So there I was, standing under neon lights, gripping the pole with sweaty palms, wearing a black bikini top and jean shorts that I hoped looked sexy, but probably didn't. The music started, something loud and bass-heavy, and I was expected to dance. Somehow, let me just say, learning to pole dance from YouTube tutorials does not prepare you for the real thing. I tried to do a little spin, and my hand immediately slipped, so I kind of stumbled around the pole instead. I could feel Rico watching from the bar, and all I could think was, I'm blowing this. I look like an idiot. But I kept moving, hoping I could at least fake my way through the song without falling on my ass. When the music ended, I climbed off the stage, bracing myself for Rico to tell me I wasn't cut out for this. But instead, he just nodded. "Not bad for your first time. You'll figure it out." And that was it. I was officially hired. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. That night was a blur. Rico told me I could start right away, which meant I had about 10 minutes to sit in the dressing room, try to stop shaking, and meet the other dancers. Most of them barely looked up when I walked in, but one of the girls, her name was Paris, gave me a quick nod and said, "First night, huh? Don't sweat it. Everyone sucks at first." She handed me a shot of vodka without waiting for me to say no. Trust me, it helps. I downed the shot, hoping it would calm my nerves. Spoiler, it didn't, but at least I felt a little warmer. When it was time for my first stage set, I stumbled out there feeling like every eye in the room was on me. The lights were too bright, the music was too loud, and the pole, my mortal enemy. I gripped it for dear life, trying to remember anything from the tutorials I'd watched. My movements were awkward at best. I did a half-ass spin and then spent the rest of the song swaying from side to side, hoping I looked mysterious instead of terrified. A few guys threw singles onto the stage, and I tried not to cry out of sheer relief. I managed to make it through 2 songs without falling, which felt like a victory, but my legs were shaking by the time I climbed down. I rushed back to the dressing room, thinking I'd just embarrassed myself into oblivion. Paris found me a few minutes later, sitting on a couch, trying to stop my hands from trembling. "How'd it go?" she asked, lighting a cigarette. "I think I bombed," I mumbled, hiding my face in my hands. She exhaled a cloud of smoke and shrugged. "Nah, you stayed on your feet. That's better than most girls on their first night." Her nonchalance made me feel slightly better. Maybe I hadn't been that terrible. After that, the real work began. Lap dances. The first customer I danced for was this skinny guy who looked like he was about to apologize for existing. He handed me $40, mumbled something about it being his birthday, and sat stiffly through the entire song like I was made of glass. It was awkward as hell, but at least he wasn't creepy. The second guy? Not so easy. He was older, drunk, and way too comfortable to try to touch me. I kept moving his hands away, but he wasn't getting the hint. I tried to laugh it off, thinking that maybe I could charm my way out of the situation, but eventually I had to stand up and tell him the dance was over. He complained to Rico, but thankfully, Rico didn't care. Some guys are assholes, Paris told me later. You learn to spot them pretty quick. By the end of the night, I'd made about $130, more than I expected, but not nearly as much as the other girls. My feet were killing me, my thighs ached from clinging to the pole, and I smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. But I had cash in my hand, real, solid cash. And that felt weirdly good, empowering even. The next night was a little easier. I started to figure out the rhythm. How to move without looking like a robot, how to flirt without feeling fake, and how to keep the creeps at arm's length. Paris gave me a few more tips, like how to charm the regulars and when to take breaks without getting fined by the house. It was a lot to take in, but I slowly got the hang of it. I stayed at that club for about 6 months. It wasn't always great. Some nights were tough and some customers made me want to scream. But it gave me what I needed: rent money, a little financial breathing room, and the confidence to stand up for myself. By the time I quit, I wasn't the same girl who'd stumbled through her first stage set. I was stronger, sharper, and yeah, I tripped a few times, literally and metaphorically, but I'd made it through. That's something, right? Looking back, my first day in the industry was a mess, but it taught me a lot about resilience. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. I knew something was wrong the night. He came home late with that distant, distracted look in his eyes. You know the one. The kind where the person sitting across from you feels like a stranger, even though you've shared a bed for years. He mumbled something about getting caught up at work, kissed me on the cheek, and disappeared into the bathroom for a shower. But the kiss was quick, almost like he was checking a box. And as the water ran, I just sat there on the couch, staring at the front door, wondering how the hell things got to this point. We'd been together for 5 years. 5 long years where I thought we had built something unbreakable. We weren't perfect, but we had our rhythm. We'd talk about our future, moving to a bigger apartment, getting a dog, maybe even marriage. I thought we were heading in the same direction, side by side. Turns out we were walking 2 very different paths, and I was the only one who didn't know it. The shift was gradual, sneaky. It started with little things like the phone. Isn't that always where it starts? He used to leave his phone lying around, unlocked, and didn't care if I glanced at it when it buzzed. But one day, that changed. Suddenly, the phone was always face down, always on silent. If I asked who was texting, he'd say, "Just work stuff," without making eye contact. I remember teasing him once, saying, "What, are you joining the CIA or something?" He gave me this tight, forced laugh and went right back to scrolling. Whatever he was hiding, I wasn't invited to see it. Then came the late nights. He was working extra hours almost every other day. At first, I tried to be supportive. I made him dinners to warm up when he got home, gave him space to unwind. But no matter how much I tried to connect, he just drifted further away. The man who used to text me during the day, just to say he missed me, now barely responded to my messages. When I asked what was going on, he brushed me off, saying he was stressed. "Work's just crazy right now," he said. But it wasn't just work. Something else was eating at him, and I was too afraid to ask what. He started dressing differently too. We were both the kind of people who threw on the same worn-out jeans and t-shirts every weekend without a second thought. But all of a sudden, he was buying new clothes, getting haircuts more often, wearing cologne again, the kind he hadn't worn since we first started dating. I asked him why the sudden interest in his appearance, and he just shrugged, saying, "I want to feel good about myself." It sounded innocent enough, but it gnawed at me, because the effort wasn't for me. He wasn't dressing up when we went out, only when he was going to work or meeting friends. But the biggest red flag? It wasn't the phone or the late nights. It was the accusations. Out of nowhere, he started questioning me. He'd say things like, "Who have you been texting?" Or, "You've been distant lately. Are you seeing someone?" It was wild because I was the one feeling distant, the one being left in the dark. It felt like I was constantly on trial, defending myself against crimes I hadn't committed. And the more I tried to reassure him, the worse it got. He would say things like, "I just feel like you're not telling me everything." And honestly, it made me feel crazy. I started doubting myself, wondering if I was doing something wrong. Then one night, everything came crashing down. He had told me he was meeting some friends for drinks after work. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing me on the top of my head like I was a pet instead of a person. Something about the way he said it felt final, like he was already halfway out the door emotionally. That night, I couldn't sit still. I tried watching TV, scrolling through my phone, anything to distract myself from the knot twisting in my gut. Around 11 p.m., I gave in to the nagging voice in the back of my head and opened the Find My app on my phone. We'd shared our locations for years, mostly for safety, but I hadn't checked his in a long time. When his location popped up, my heart sank. He wasn't at the bar he said he was going to. He was at some apartment complex across town. My first thought was, maybe it's one of his friends' places. But deep down, I knew. I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. It was one of those moments where time slows down, and you realize everything you thought was true wasn't. I didn't call him. I just sat there, waiting. He stumbled in around 2 a.m., smelling like alcohol and that same floral perfume I'd noticed on him once before. I was sitting on the couch, and when he saw me, he froze. "Hey," he mumbled, like he hadn't just shattered my entire world. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. He gave me that same rehearsed smile, the one I'd seen too many times by now. "At the bar, like I told you." I held up my phone, showing him the location tracker. "Try again." His face went pale. For a second, he looked like a cornered animal, caught, panicking, but not sure whether to fight or flee. "It's not what you think," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "We were just hanging out. Nothing happened." I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Don't insult me." And just like that, the facade crumbled. He admitted it. There was someone else. He tried to downplay it, saying it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. But the damage was already done. Months of late nights, lies, and secrets. Everything I'd been doubting, everything I'd tried to ignore, was suddenly laid bare. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just shut down. I told him to pack his things and leave. He tried to apologize, said he didn't want to lose me, that he loved me. But love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't hide behind passwords and perfume. Love doesn't make you question your worth, your sanity. He left that night, and I haven't seen him since. In the days that followed, I went through every emotion: rage, sadness, disbelief. I replayed every conversation, every missed sign, wondering how I let myself be so blind. But here's the truth. When you love someone, you don't want to see the cracks. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that things will get better because the alternative is too painful to bear. It took me a long time to heal from that, to learn to trust myself again. But if I learned one thing, it's this: your gut doesn't lie. If something feels off, it probably is. People can manipulate you, gaslight you, make you feel like you're crazy. But deep down, you always know when something isn't right. Next time, I won't ignore the signs. Because no matter how much you love someone, if they make you feel like you have to play detective in your own relationship, it's already over. I still don't really know how it happened. It feels like one of those things you look back on and think, what the hell was I doing? But in the moment, it all just happened. I was 26 at the time, and my buddy Tom had been one of my closest friends since high school. We'd been through everything together: breakups, road trips, drunken nights we barely remembered the next day. His family was like a second family to me, and his mom, Dana, had always been this easygoing, cool mom. She wasn't the strict, stay-in-the-background type. She was funny, warm, and had a kind of energy that made you want to hang out with her. And yeah, she was attractive. I'd be lying if I said we didn't joke about it when we were younger. She was in her mid-40s, blonde, always looked like she'd just come from yoga or a beach vacation, even if she was just running errands. She didn't try to act young, but she didn't seem like a middle-aged mom either. But again, she was always just Tom's mom. Attractive, sure, but nothing more than that. Or at least, that's what I thought. It was last summer when things got complicated. Tom and I had planned a weekend camping trip, but at the last minute, he got sick some nasty stomach bug. I was already packed and ready to go, so Dana offered to hang out with me instead, saying it'd be nice to catch up since Tom had been traveling for work a lot. I figured, why not? It was just a casual hangout. She invited me over for a drink, and I told myself it was no big deal. When I got to her place, everything felt normal at first. She poured us both some wine, and we sat out on the patio, talking about life, relationships, and how weird it felt getting older. She opened up about being divorced for a few years and how hard it was getting back into the dating scene. I told her about how I'd been feeling stuck in life, stuck in my job, stuck in my dating life, just stuck. It felt good to talk to someone who wasn't part of my usual circle. After a couple of glasses of wine, the vibe shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just little things. The way she laughed a bit too long at my jokes, or how she brushed her hand against mine when she refilled my glass. At one point, she put on some music and asked if I wanted to dance. I remember thinking it was a little weird, but it wasn't like she was coming on to me, right? It was just playful. But then, as we danced, she rested her hand on my chest for a second too long, and I knew this was heading somewhere it shouldn't. I felt that knot in my stomach, the one you get when you're standing on the edge of a bad decision and you're not sure if you're going to jump or back away. I should have backed away. I really should have, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned in and kissed her. It was like crossing a line I didn't know existed until I was already on the other side of it. One kiss turned into two, and then we were on the couch, making out like a couple of teenagers. My heart was racing, and every part of me knew this was wrong. This was Tom's mom. But it didn't stop. It was like everything else faded away in that moment. We stumbled upstairs to her bedroom, and while things happened, it was wild and intense. And afterward, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. Dana seemed fine, relaxed even, but my brain was spinning in a million different directions. I remember getting up in the middle of the night, putting my clothes back on, and saying something dumb like, I should probably get going. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and said, you don't have to overthink it. It was fun. I left anyway. The next day, I told myself it was a one-time thing, just a weird night fueled by too much wine and loneliness. But then she texted me, just a casual, thanks for the great company last night. Let's do it again sometime. And like an idiot, I responded. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that it was just two adults having fun, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. It didn't stop there. For the next couple of months, Dana and I kept meeting up. It wasn't just about the physical stuff, either. We'd talk, laugh, hang out like we were old friends. It felt easy, too easy. And every time I'd leave her house, the guilt would hit me all over again. Tom had no idea. He kept inviting me over to hang out, and every time I saw him, I felt like the world's biggest piece of shit. I told myself I'd end it with Dana, that I couldn't keep doing this, but then she'd text me, and I'd end up right back at her place. I was caught in this messed up cycle, and I didn't know how to get out of it. Then everything came crashing down. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was at Dana's house, sitting on the couch with her, when the front door opened. I'll never forget the sound of Tom's keys hitting the table, followed by his voice calling out, "Hey Mom, you home?" My heart stopped. Dana's face went pale. We scrambled to make ourselves look normal, like two people just sitting on the couch talking. But I knew it was too late. Tom walked into the living room, took one look at us, and instantly knew something was off. He didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, staring at me, his jaw clenched. And then, in the quietest, calmest voice, he asked, "What the hell is going on?" I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. What was I supposed to say? "Sorry, bro. I've been hooking up with your mom for the past few months." There was no excuse, no way to justify it. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. Tom didn't wait for an explanation. He just shook his head, said, "I can't believe you," and walked out the door. That was the last time I saw him. He blocked me on everything. Social media, text calls. I was out of his life for good. As for Dana, we ended things right after that. There was no dramatic goodbye or emotional closure. We both knew it was over, and that was that. I haven't spoken to her since, and honestly, I hope I never do. It's been months, and I still think about it all the time. I lost my best friend because I couldn't control myself. I wrecked years of friendship for something that never should have happened in the first place. So yeah, that's my story. It's not one I'm proud of, but it's the truth. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that some mistakes follow you forever. And no matter how much time passes, you can't take them back. So, let me tell you about the time I almost got taken out by a bottle of soda. I know it sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. This was one of those moments where you think you're just having a normal day, and the universe is like, nah, let's see what happens if we crank the chaos to 11. It started on a Saturday afternoon. I'd just come back from the grocery store, and I was unloading the bags in my kitchen. One of those bags had a 2-liter bottle of soda, some generic cola I grabbed because it was on sale. No big deal. I tossed the bottle onto the counter, figuring I'd throw it in the fridge later. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but apparently I'd been a little too aggressive with the groceries. Maybe I dropped the bag or jostled it on the way in, but that soda was pressurized like a freaking bomb waiting to go off. Anyway, after I put away everything else, I grabbed the bottle to stick it in the fridge. But right as I picked it up, I noticed the plastic felt kind of bloated, like it was under way more pressure than usual. A normal person probably would have stopped right there and thought, maybe I shouldn't open this. But not me. No, I had that genius-level confidence that makes you think it'll be fine. Spoiler alert, it was not fine. I twisted the cap, and everything happened at once. The second the seal broke, the bottle exploded. I don't mean it fizzed a little. I mean it detonated like a damn grenade. The cap shot off with the force of a bullet, ricocheting off the ceiling, and the soda came flying out of the bottle in a pressurized geyser straight into my face. I didn't even have time to react. 1 second, I'm standing there, and the next, I'm soaking wet, gasping for air and blind because cola was burning my eyes. And the worst part? The bottle wasn't done with me yet. In my panic, I tried to grab the bottle to stop the flow, but it slipped out of my hands, hit the floor, and started spinning. You ever seen a fire hose whip around when someone loses control of it? Yeah, it was like that. The bottle spun in circles on the floor, spraying soda in every direction, turning my kitchen into a sticky, chaotic nightmare. I tried to dodge it, but in the chaos, I slipped on the puddle of soda and went down hard, really hard. My legs flew out from under me, and I landed flat on my back, smacking my head against the kitchen tile. For a second, I just lay there, stunned, while the soda bottle continued its rampage, spraying everything in sight like it had a personal vendetta against me. And then I realized I couldn't breathe. I tried to take a breath, but nothing was happening. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and pulled it as tight as possible. My brain went from wow, this is a mess, to oh my god, I'm actually about to die in about 2 seconds. I think the fall had knocked the wind out of me, but in that moment, I couldn't tell if I'd hit my head too hard or if I was having some kind of weird, soda-induced seizure. I tried to sit up, but my back was screaming in pain and my head was throbbing. It felt like the floor had sucker punched me. Meanwhile, the soda was still spraying. At this point, mostly out of spite, I think, while I lay there gasping like a fish on dry land, trying to figure out how my day had gone so catastrophically wrong. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to roll onto my side and suck in a ragged breath. The air hit my lungs like a punch, and I started coughing so hard I thought I might pass out again. I lay there for a while, coughing, wheezing, and drenched in soda, trying to process the fact that I'd just been attacked by a bottle of cola. When I finally managed to get up, still dripping wet and in pain, I looked around at the aftermath. My entire kitchen was a disaster zone. The walls were streaked with soda, the counters were coated in sticky residue, and my clothes looked like I'd been caught in a cola rainstorm. And me? I was still shaking from the adrenaline, with a pounding headache and a bruise forming on my lower back. I sat down on the floor, staring at the now empty bottle, and just laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of almost dying because I opened a bottle of soda was just too much. I mean, who the hell dies from a soda explosion? Apparently almost me. After that, I did some Googling because I had to know how close I'd actually come to getting killed by a soft drink. And it turns out this kind of thing isn't that uncommon. If a soda bottle gets shaken or overpressurized, like say if you drop it on the way home, it can build up enough pressure to turn into a little carbonated bomb. And the cap, yeah, that thing can shoot off with enough force to break glass or even injure someone. People have lost eyes to rogue bottle caps, and some have even gotten concussions from them. So yeah, lesson learned, respect the soda. I never open a bottle the same way anymore. These days, I treat every 2-liter like it's about to detonate. I crack the lid slowly, with the bottle pointed away from me, and I make sure it hasn't been shaken before I even touch it. It's not worth the risk. The moral of the story? You never know when something completely ordinary is going to turn on you. 1 second, you're making lunch, and the next, you're dodging a high-pressure cola missile and gasping for air on your kitchen floor. Life is weird like that. Stay safe out there, folks. And if you buy a 2-liter of soda, open it like it's a live grenade. Because sometimes it basically is. We've been together for almost 7 years. Long enough that our lives were fully intertwined. Shared bank accounts, vacations with each other's families, and a routine so predictable it felt like clockwork. I thought we were solid, the kind of couple that grows old together, weathering life's storms hand in hand. But love has a funny way of blinding you to the truth, doesn't it? You see the signs, little cracks forming, and instead of questioning them, you tell yourself everything is fine. Until it isn't. It started with his phone. God, it always starts with the phone. He used to leave it lying around without a second thought, but one day, that changed. It became an extension of him. Always within reach, always face down. He started putting a passcode on it, something he'd never bothered with before. I asked him why, and he laughed it off. Just being cautious, he said. What if I lose it? It sounded reasonable enough, but I knew it was bullshit. I told myself I was overreacting, though. After all, 7 years is a long time. People grow, habits change, right? Then came the excuses. Work suddenly became more demanding. He started staying late, leaving early, and traveling more often. It was always the same story. I've got a lot on my plate right now. I believed him because I wanted to. I told myself it was just a busy season. But then he started coming home at odd hours, smelling like he'd showered somewhere else. Not quite soap, not quite cologne, but a weird combination of both. And once, just faintly, I smelled perfume on him. Not mine. Not anything I'd ever worn. The little nagging voice in my head started to get louder. I asked him about it one night, keeping my tone light so I wouldn't sound accusatory. So, what's up with all the late nights? I said, half joking. Got a secret life you're not telling me about? He laughed, but it felt forced. You're being ridiculous, he said. It's just work. Stop worrying so much. I tried to brush it off, but something about the way he said it stayed with me. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. The emotional distance started creeping in soon after. He wasn't mean or cold, just absent. He stopped texting me during the day, stopped asking about my plans or how my day went. He was physically there, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. I started feeling like a roommate rather than a partner. Sex became a distant memory. When we first got together, intimacy had been second nature, something that connected us no matter how stressful life got. But now, it was like a switch had been flipped. He always had an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, not in the mood. I try not to take it personally. I told myself that maybe he was going through something and didn't know how to talk about it. But then the accusations started, and that's when things got weird. Out of the blue, he began accusing me of cheating. It came out of nowhere, little comments about how I seemed distracted or how I was always on my phone. Once, after I came back from lunch with a friend, he flat out asked, "Who are you really with?" I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. He looked at me with this strange mix of suspicion and insecurity, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. He's projecting. I didn't want to believe it, though. Not him. Not after everything we'd built together. So I ignored the voice in my head and tried to carry on, convincing myself that things would get better, that this was just a phase. The night everything came crashing down is still burned into my brain. He told me he was going out for drinks with some coworkers. "Don't wait up," he said with that same dismissive kiss on the forehead that had become routine. Something about the way he said it made my heart sink. I watched him walk out the door, and for the first time, I felt certain something's not right. I waited for a couple of hours, staring at the wall, trying to talk myself out of what I already knew I was going to do. Finally, I grabbed my phone and opened the location sharing app. My hands were shaking as I scrolled to his name. He wasn't at any bar. He was at a hotel. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, hoping, praying that there was some kind of logical explanation. Maybe he was meeting someone for work. Maybe it was an emergency. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what was happening. I waited. Hours passed. He finally stumbled in sometime after 3 a.m., looking a little too put together for someone who'd supposedly been drinking with coworkers. His shirt was neatly tucked, his hair freshly combed, and that same trace of unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air around him. I didn't even pretend to be asleep. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and said, "Where were you?" He froze just for a second, and then gave me a tired smile. "I told you, drinks with work friends." I shook my head. "Don't lie to me." His expression faltered for the briefest moment, and that was all the confirmation I needed. My voice was surprisingly steady when I said, "I know you were at the hotel." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I held up my phone, showing him the location tracker. "Don't," I whispered. "Just tell me the truth." He stared at me for a long time, as if weighing his options. Then finally he sighed. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh, short and humorless. "It's exactly what I think." He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he mumbled. "It just did." I sat there, numb, as he tried to explain himself. He said it had started a few months ago. It was just physical, he insisted, as if that made it better. I barely heard the rest of his excuses. My heart felt like it was being crushed under the weight of every lie, every betrayal. When he was done, I asked him one final question. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" He looked at the floor and whispered, "No." And that was it. The final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just shut down. I stood up, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing clothes into it. He didn't stop me. He didn't say a word. I left that night and never looked back. It's been months since then, and I'd love to say that I'm fully healed, but the truth is betrayal leaves scars. It makes you question everything, every relationship, every instinct, every moment where you thought you were safe. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. If your gut is telling you something is off, listen. Don't wait for the lies to pile up until you can't breathe. Don't ignore the little signs. The phone turned face down, the sudden gym sessions, the unexplained distance. People show you who they are. You just have to be willing to see it. Next time, I'll trust my instincts. Because the person who truly loves you will never make you feel like you need to search for the truth in the first place. I've always thought of myself as a rational person. I never believed in ghosts, aliens, or any of that paranormal stuff. I was the guy who'd laugh off conspiracy theories and dismiss weird coincidences as just that, coincidences. But after what happened to me a couple of months ago, I'm not so sure anymore. In fact, I don't know what to believe. It started on a Saturday morning. My girlfriend and I had just moved into a new apartment, a quiet little place on the edge of town, away from the busy streets and noise. It was nothing fancy, but it was home, and we were excited to make it our own. We spent the day unpacking boxes, setting up furniture, and hanging pictures. Everything felt normal. That night, after we'd finished most of the unpacking, we decided to order takeout and relax. We sat on the couch, eating pizza and watching TV, enjoying the feeling of finally being settled. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. My girlfriend went to bed first, and I stayed up a little longer to finish an episode of the show we were watching. I don't know exactly when it started, but at some point I noticed a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was just the neighbors or maybe the pipes in the building. It's an old place, after all. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't coming from outside or the walls. It was coming from inside our apartment. The sound was subtle at first. Just a soft tap, 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 like something gently knocking on wood. I paused the TV and listened more closely. The tapping seemed to be coming from the hallway near the front door. I stood up, curious, and walked over to check it out. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the tapping stopped. Complete silence. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if it would start again, but it didn't. I shrugged it off, figuring it was probably nothing. Just the building settling, maybe. But as soon as I turned to go back to the living room, I heard it again. Top, top, top. This time it was louder, more distinct. And this time, I was sure of it. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the neighbors. It was coming from inside the apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked back into the hallway, slowly this time, and listened again. The tapping stopped the moment I got close to the front door. I stood there for a second, feeling a little foolish, and then I decided to open the door, just to be sure there wasn't something outside. I opened it and nothing. The hallway outside our apartment was empty, just as quiet and still as before. I closed the door, locking it behind me, and turned to head back to the couch. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, the tapping started again. Only this time, it was coming from the bedroom. My heart started pounding. I called out to my girlfriend, thinking maybe she was knocking on something in her sleep or messing with me. But she didn't answer. The tapping continued, steady and rhythmic. Top, top, top. I hesitated for a moment, and then I walked down the hall toward the bedroom. I pushed the door open, expecting to find her asleep, maybe knocking against the wall or the headboard. But when I stepped inside, she was lying completely still, fast asleep. The tapping sound, though, was louder now, echoing in the quiet room, and it was coming from the closet. I froze. The closet door was shut, and I could see the faintest shadow underneath it. Something moving. My stomach dropped. I stood there, staring at the door, my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a draft or some old wiring making noises. Maybe the sound was coming from the apartment above us. But deep down, I knew none of those things made sense. The sound was too deliberate, too real. I took a deep breath and walked over to the closet. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The tapping stopped again, just like before. I stood there, hesitating, my hand hovering over the handle. Part of me didn't want to open it, didn't want to see whatever was making that noise. But I had to know. I yanked the door open, and the closet was empty. Nothing. Just clothes hanging neatly on the rod and a couple of unpacked boxes on the floor. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. I checked the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. No pipes, no vents, no source for the sound. Nothing that could have explained the tapping. Feeling more uneasy than ever, I closed the closet door and went back to bed. I didn't say anything to my girlfriend, figuring I'd just imagine the whole thing, maybe tired from the long day of moving. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the tapping to start again. And it did. At exactly 3:03 a.m., I heard it again, tap, 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 this time coming from the living room. I shot out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and stormed down the hallway, ready to catch whatever was making that sound. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, the tapping stopped, just like before. The room was silent, completely still. I don't know how to explain what happened next. I don't even know if I can. But as I stood there in the darkness, I felt a presence behind me. Something cold, something watching. I turned slowly, shining the flashlight down the hall toward the bedroom. And for just a split second, I saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, standing at the end of the hall, staring at me with eyes that weren't there. I blinked, and it was gone. I haven't heard the tapping since that night, but I haven't slept well either. There's something in this apartment, something I can't explain, something that doesn't want us here. I'll try to tell myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind, but deep down I know that's not true. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that I'm never opening that closet again. This happened last spring, and it's probably the closest I've ever come to. I don't know, something really bad happening. I still get chills thinking about it, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make sense of what went down that night. So, I was driving back from visiting a friend who lives way out in the countryside, about 2 hours from my place. It was one of those late-night hangouts that lasted way longer than it should have. You know the kind. Drinks, deep conversations, and suddenly you realize it's 1 a.m. and you've got a long, dark drive ahead of you. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I figured I'd just blast some music, stay alert, and be home before I knew it. The first hour or so of the drive was uneventful. The roads out there are long and empty, winding through fields and patches of forest. I was the only car on the road, and after a while, the headlights and the rhythmic hum of the engine started to feel hypnotic. That's when the GPS decided to reroute me. I was coming up on a construction zone, and the GPS told me to take a detour, down a smaller road. I didn't think much of it. These things happen, right? So I followed the new route without giving it a second thought. The road it sent me down was narrow and winding, cutting through a dense forest that swallowed up the headlights almost entirely. It was the kind of dark where even with high beams, you couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead of you. I kept driving, feeling that slight unease you get when you're out in the middle of nowhere, far from anything familiar. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I'd be back on the highway soon, and everything would be fine. But after about 15 minutes, something strange happened. I passed a sign that said mile 46. Nothing weird about that, right? Except 5 minutes later, I passed the same sign again. Mile 46. Same bent post, same chipped paint. I knew I hadn't turned around. I'd been driving straight the whole time, but somehow I'd ended up in the exact same place. A knot formed in my stomach, and I slowed the car down, trying to figure out if maybe I'd missed a turn or if the GPS had glitched. I looked at my phone, but the map was still showing me on the same road, just one straight line through the forest. I shook it off, told myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me, and kept going. Then I saw it. Up ahead, just barely visible in the headlights, was a car parked on the side of the road. It looked old, maybe from the 70s or 80s, with rust patches along the fenders and cracked windows. The headlights were off, and there was no sign of anyone inside. Something about the car gave me a bad feeling. I've driven past plenty of broken-down cars in my life, but this one felt off, like it wasn't supposed to be there. I slowed down as I passed it, peering into the windows to see if maybe someone needed help. But there was no one inside. Just empty seats, worn and torn from age. That's when I noticed the driver's door was slightly open. I can't explain why, but that little detail sent a chill down my spine. Something told me to keep moving, so I pressed down on the gas and drove past it, trying not to think about the strange feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. A few minutes later, I passed another sign, mile 46. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding in my chest. There was no way I'd just driven past the same sign 3 times. I should have been miles away from that spot by now, but somehow I was back where I started. Then I saw the car again. Same rusted old thing, sitting on the side of the road with the driver's door hanging open. Only this time, it wasn't empty. There was someone standing next to it. The figure was tall, almost unnaturally tall, with long limbs and a head that seemed slightly too big for its body. It was standing perfectly still, facing the car like it was waiting for something. I couldn't see its face. It was turned just enough that the shadows kept it hidden, but I knew, without a doubt, that it was aware of me. My whole body went cold. I didn't even think. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped past the car, not daring to look back. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and all I could think about was getting off that road. But the road didn't end. No matter how far I drove, the forest stayed the same. The same trees, the same twists and turns, over and over again. It felt like I was stuck in a loop, trapped in some endless stretch of road that wouldn't let me leave. And then the radio came on. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even thought about it. But suddenly, the radio crackled to life, filling the car with static. My heart skipped a beat as I fumbled with the dial, trying to turn it off, but it wouldn't stop. The static grew louder, and beneath it, I thought I heard something else. A voice. It was faint, barely audible beneath the hiss of the static, but I could make out words. "Where are you going?" It whispered, slow and deliberate. "There's no way out." I yanked the power cord for the radio out of the dashboard, but the static kept playing louder and louder until it filled the entire car. Then the headlights flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. The road, the trees, the car, everything disappeared into blackness. When the lights came back on, I wasn't alone. There was someone sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't see them clearly, just a shape, a shadow where no one should have been. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, tires screeching on the pavement. I turned to the passenger seat, but it was empty. Whoever or whatever had been there was gone. The radio fell silent. The forest was still, and up ahead, through the trees, I saw the faint glow of headlights. Not the creepy, rusted car I'd seen before. This was a semi-truck, rumbling down the highway. I'd made it. Somehow, I'd made it back to the real world. I don't remember much after that. I just know I floored it, pulled back onto the highway, and didn't stop driving until I was back in the city. I don't know what happened on that road. Maybe it was some kind of glitch in reality, or maybe I was just too tired and started hallucinating. But one thing's for sure, I'm never taking a GPS detour again. And sometimes late at night, when the radio in my car flickers with static for no reason, I wonder if that road is still out there, waiting. Alright, this one's probably the dumbest thing I've ever been involved in, but at the time it felt like absolute genius. It was junior year, and our school had this big rivalry with another high school across town. Every year, we had this big football game against them called the Turkey Bowl right before Thanksgiving, and it was a huge deal. The whole week leading up to the game was filled with pep rallies, spirit days, and endless trash talk between the two schools. But this year, someone decided that trash talk wasn't enough. We needed to do something bigger. Enter Derek. Now, Derek was one of those guys who always managed to find trouble, even when he wasn't looking for it. The guy practically majored in bad ideas. So, when he told us he had the perfect plan to prank our rival school before the big game, we should have known better. But we were 17 and stupid, so of course we were all in. The plan? Break into their football field and spray paint a giant message across the turf the night before the game. And not just any message. Derek wanted to paint "Turkeys suck" in huge letters, right in the middle of their end zone. It was dumb, petty, and illegal, but at the time, it felt like a perfectly reasonable way to express school spirit. So, the night before the game, Derek rounded up a few of us. Me, our friend Tyler, and a girl named Jess who had a car. And we set off on what was probably the worst planned heist in high school history. We waited until midnight, figuring the place would be deserted. Derek had somehow borrowed a couple of cans of bright yellow spray paint from the art room, and we all dressed in black like we were about to rob a bank. We pulled up to the rival school's football field, parked a few blocks away so we wouldn't be seen, and hopped the fence. At first, everything was going smoothly. It was dark, quiet, and kind of exciting in a "we're probably going to get arrested" kind of way. We made it to the end zone, and Derek popped the cap off the spray paint like a pro. "All right," he whispered. "Let's do this." He started spraying the word "turkeys" in giant, uneven letters across the turf. Tyler was supposed to help him, but Tyler, being the idiot that he is, decided it would be funny to draw a crude cartoon turkey next to the words. I was supposed to be on lookout, but I kept getting distracted watching them mess around, laughing way harder than I should have been for someone about to commit vandalism. We were halfway through painting the word "suck" when disaster struck. Out of nowhere, a set of bright headlights lit up the field. We all froze like deer in headlights. At first, I thought it was just a passing car, but no, it was a security truck. And it wasn't just passing by, it was coming straight toward us. "Run!" Derek yelled. We bolted. Jess took off toward the fence. Tyler dropped his spray, paint in mid-turkey drawing. And I swear Derek almost tripped over his own feet trying to grab the backpack with the other paint cans. The security guard must have seen us, because he sped up, aiming his truck right for the gate. I've never run so fast in my life. We made it to the fence and started scrambling over it just as the truck skidded to a stop a few feet away. Jess made it over first, then Tyler, and I was halfway over when I felt the toe of my shoe get stuck in the chain links. I panicked, twisted my foot, and ended up falling off the top of the fence, flat on my back, right in front of the security guard. For a second, I just laid there staring up at the sky, thinking, well, this is it. I'm going to jail for a football prank. But Derek, of course, Derek wasn't about to leave me behind. Instead of running, he ran back to the fence, grabbed me by the arm, and yanked me to my feet. "Come on, dude," he shouted, dragging me toward Jess's car like we were being chased by zombies. Somehow, miraculously, we made it to the car before the guard could catch us. We all piled in, and Jess hit the gas, peeling out of there so fast the tires screeched. I was still gasping for air when Tyler turned around from the front seat, grinning like a lunatic. "Did we finish it?" he asked. "No," Derek groaned, pulling off his black hoodie. "We didn't even get to the S." That's when it hit me. All we'd managed to spray paint on the field was "Turkeys SU." For a second, we just sat there in stunned silence, realizing that all our effort had amounted to the dumbest half-finished insult in history. Then, all at once, we lost it. We were laughing so hard Jess had to pull over because she couldn't see through her tears. "Turkey's SU?" she gasped between wheezes. "What does that even mean?" The next day at school, word spread fast. Apparently, someone had found the half-finished graffiti early that morning, and the rival school was furious, but mostly just confused. There were rumors flying around that the message was some kind of cryptic code, or maybe an inside joke between students. The best part? Our football team won the game, and after the final whistle, some of our students started chanting, "Turkey's SU, Turkey's SU," like it was a real insult. To this day, no one knows it was us. The prank was technically a failure, but somehow it became this weird, legendary joke that stuck around for years. At every turkey bowl after that, people would chant "Turkey's SU," and no one could explain why, but everyone just went with it. Even the teachers thought it was funny after a while. "And Derek? He wore it like a badge of honor. They'll never know what it means," he'd say with a smirk, like he was some kind of prank genius. "Because it doesn't mean anything." So yeah, that's the story of how a half-finished prank turned into an accidental school tradition. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. We've been together for almost 7 years, long enough that our lives were fully intertwined, shared bank accounts, vacations with each other's families, and a routine so predictable it felt like clockwork. I thought we were solid, the kind of couple that grows old together, weathering life's storms hand in hand. But love has a funny way of blinding you to the truth, doesn't it? You see the signs, little cracks forming, and instead of questioning them, you tell yourself everything is fine. Until it isn't. It started with his phone. God, it always starts with the phone. He used to leave it lying around without a second thought, but one day that changed. It became an extension of him. Always within reach, always face down. He started putting a passcode on it, something he'd never bothered with before. I asked him why, and he laughed it off. "Just being cautious," he said. "What if I lose it?" It sounded reasonable enough, but I knew it was bullshit. I told myself I was overreacting, though. After all, 7 years is a long time. People grow, habits change, right? Then came the excuses. Work suddenly became more demanding. He started staying late, leaving early, and traveling more often. It was always the same story. "I've got a lot on my plate right now." I believed him because I wanted to. I told myself it was just a busy season. But then he started coming home at odd hours, smelling like he'd showered somewhere else. Not quite soap, not quite cologne, but a weird combination of both. And once, just faintly, I smelled perfume on him. Not mine, not anything I'd ever worn. The little nagging voice in my head started to get louder. I asked him about it one night, keeping my tone light, so I wouldn't sound accusatory. "So, what's up with all the late nights?" I said, half joking. "Got a secret life you're not telling me about?" He laughed, but it felt forced. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "It's just work. Stop worrying so much." I tried to brush it off, but something about the way he said it stayed with me. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. The emotional distance started creeping in soon after. He wasn't mean or cold, just absent. He stopped texting me during the day, stopped asking about my plans or how my day went. He was physically there, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. I started feeling like a roommate rather than a partner. Sex became a distant memory. When we first got together, intimacy had been second nature, something that connected us no matter how stressful life got. But now, it was like a switch had been flipped. He always had an excuse. Too tired, too stressed, not in the mood. I try not to take it personally. I told myself that maybe he was going through something and didn't know how to talk about it. But then the accusation started, and that's when things got weird. Out of the blue, he began accusing me of cheating. It came out of nowhere, little comments about how I seemed distracted or how I was always on my phone. Once, after I came back from lunch with a friend, he flat out asked, "Who were you really with?" I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. He looked at me with this strange mix of suspicion and insecurity, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. He's projecting. I didn't want to believe it, though. Not him. Not after everything we'd built together. So I ignored the voice in my head and tried to carry on, convincing myself that things would get better, that this was just a phase. The night everything came crashing down is still burned into my brain. He told me he was going out for drinks with some co-workers. "Don't wait up," he said with that same dismissive kiss on the forehead that had become routine. Something about the way he said it made my heart sink. I watched him walk out the door, and for the first time, I felt certain something's not right. I waited for a couple of hours, staring at the wall, trying to talk myself out of what I already knew I was going to do. Finally, I grabbed my phone and opened the location sharing app. My hands were shaking as I scrolled to his name. He wasn't at any bar. He was at a hotel. The ground beneath me seemed to shift. I sat there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, hoping, praying, that there was some kind of logical explanation. Maybe he was meeting someone for work. Maybe it was an emergency. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what was happening. I waited. Hours passed. He finally stumbled in sometime after 3 a.m., looking a little too put together for someone who'd supposedly been drinking with coworkers. His shirt was neatly tucked, his hair freshly combed, and that same trace of unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air around him. I didn't even pretend to be asleep. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and said, "Where were you?" He froze just for a second and then gave me a tired smile. "I told you, drinks with work friends." I shook my head. "Don't lie to me." His expression faltered for the briefest moment, and that was all the confirmation I needed. My voice was surprisingly steady when I said, "I know you were at the hotel." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I held up my phone, showing him the location tracker. "Don't," I whispered. "Just tell me the truth." He stared at me for a long time, as if weighing his options. Then finally he sighed. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh, short and humorless. "It's exactly what I think." He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he mumbled. "It just did." I sat there, numb, as he tried to explain himself. He said it had started a few months ago. It was just physical, he insisted, as if that made it better. I barely heard the rest of his excuses. My heart felt like it was being crushed under the weight of every lie, every betrayal. When he was done, I asked him one final question. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" He looked at the floor and whispered, "No." And that was it. The final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was shut down. I stood up, grabbed a suitcase, and started throwing clothes into it. He didn't stop me. He didn't say a word. I left that night and never looked back. It's been months since then, and I'd love to say that I'm fully healed, but the truth is betrayal leaves scars. It makes you question everything. Every relationship, every instinct, every moment where you thought you were safe. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. If your gut is telling you something is off, listen. Don't wait for the lies to pile up until you can't breathe. Don't ignore the little signs. The phone turned face down, the sudden gym sessions, the unexplained distance. People show you who they are. You just have to be willing to see it. Next time, I'll trust my instincts. Because the person who truly loves you will never make you feel like you need to search for the truth in the first place. This happened a few years ago when I was working night shifts at a 24-hour gas station. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and honestly, most nights were boring. I'd sit behind the counter, scroll through my phone, restock the shelves, and maybe see 5 or 6 customers between midnight and 6 a.m. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, so I never really felt unsafe. But that night was different. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and the station was dead quiet. No cars on the road, no customers, just the hum of the coolers and the occasional beep from the security cameras. I just finished restocking the drinks when I noticed something weird. One of the pumps was still active. At first, I thought maybe someone had pulled in without me noticing, but when I looked out the window, the lot was empty. Just the flickering lights of the pumps and the endless stretch of road beyond them. The pump numbers on the register said someone had activated pump number 3 about 5 minutes ago, but there was no car. That little knot of unease started forming in my stomach, but I brushed it off. Maybe someone had pulled in, realized they didn't have their wallet, and left without fueling up. It wasn't unusual for people to activate the pump and cancel it right after. Still, I kept glancing out the window, just in case. The station was surrounded by woods, And once in a while, you'd get weirdos coming through, people passing through town, looking for gas or a bathroom in the middle of nowhere. I figured that was all it was. About 10 minutes went by, and I'd almost forgotten about the weird pump activation when the door chime went off. I looked up from my phone, expecting to see some trucker or a guy on his way home from the bar. But the person who walked in wasn't someone I recognized. He was off, tall, skinny, with clothes that didn't fit him right, like he'd borrowed them from someone else. His shirt was wrinkled, his jeans too short at the ankles, and he wore these old, beat-up sneakers that looked like they'd seen better days a decade ago. But it was his face that really gave me the creeps. His expression was blank, completely devoid of emotion, and his eyes didn't seem to focus on anything. It was like he was looking through me, not at me. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, forcing a smile, though my gut was starting to churn. He didn't answer, just stood there, a few feet inside the door, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. For a moment, I thought maybe he was drunk or high or just really out of it. But then he smiled, or at least I think he tried to. His lips pulled back a little too far, showing just a bit too much of his teeth, and the expression didn't reach his eyes at all. Something about that smile made my skin crawl. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stood there for a second longer, still smiling that weird, unsettling smile. Then, without a word, he turned and walked straight toward the back of the store, to the coolers. I watched him the entire time, my heart thudding in my chest. Something about him felt wrong, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. He walked to the very last cooler at the back of the store, the one no one ever really used because it was mostly just expired energy drinks and random off-brand sodas. He stood there for a long time, not opening the door, not moving, just staring at it. At this point, every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. I grabbed the phone from under the counter, keeping one eye on the security monitors. He was still standing at the cooler, motionless, his back to the camera. I was about to call my manager when he moved, slowly, almost mechanically, and walked back toward the front of the store. But instead of coming to the counter, he went to the window. He stood there, looking out at the empty pumps, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. And then he said in the quietest, most chilling voice I've ever heard, "He's coming soon." I felt my stomach drop. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring out the window like he was waiting for someone. At this point, I was starting to panic. I thought about locking the door and calling the police, but I didn't want to set him off. I had no idea what this guy's deal was, but I wasn't about to find out the hard way. After what felt like an eternity, the man turned away from the window and looked right at me. And for the first time, his eyes seemed to focus directly on mine. "He's almost here," he said softly. And with that, he walked out the door. The chime jingled as he left, and I watched him disappear into the night, his figure melting into the shadows by the side of the building. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, staring at the spot where he'd vanished. Then I snapped out of it and rushed to the door, locking it behind him. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely turn the key. I grabbed the phone again and started dialing the non-emergency line for the police. I figured I'd report the guy, just in case. But before the call could go through, I heard it, a car engine. Slowly, I turned toward the pumps, my heart hammering in my chest. A black sedan I hadn't seen before was parked at pump number 3, its headlights off, engine idling quietly in the dark. The windows were tinted so dark, I couldn't see inside. I stood there, frozen, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The car sat there for a few moments, the engine humming softly. And then, just as silently as it had arrived, it backed away from the pump and disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but the sound of tires crunching on the snow. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. The cops came and did a quick drive-by, but they didn't find anything. No sign of the man, no trace of the black sedan. To this day, I have no idea who that man was, what he was waiting for, or what he meant when he said, "He's coming soon." But I know one thing for sure. Whatever, or whoever was coming, I'm glad I didn't wait to find out. Alright, so here's how my first day went. Spoiler alert. It was both one of the most embarrassing and unexpectedly empowering nights of my life. It still makes me cringe when I think about it. But hey, it's part of the journey, right? So, I was 22, broke, and in that I'll do anything as long as it pays phase of life. I had just quit my dead-end job at a smoothie bar because my manager was a creep who kept brushing up against me accidentally. Rent was coming up fast, and I was getting desperate. I'd heard from an old high school acquaintance, someone I wasn't even close to, that she had started stripping and was making good money. She said it was easy once you get past the first day. Easy money? I figured, why not? How hard could it really be? So I Googled a few clubs in my area and found one that advertised auditions with no experience required. That felt like a green light to me, considering I had the coordination of a baby giraffe. I called ahead, and the guy on the phone, let's call him Jimmy, sounded way too excited when he told me to come by that same night. I spent the whole afternoon freaking out. I didn't own anything remotely sexy, so I ran to the mall and bought this cheap lace bodysuit and a pair of black heels that were way too tall for me. I remember looking at myself in the mirror before I left, thinking, this is either going to be the best decision I've ever made or the worst. When I arrived at the club, it looked kind of run down from the outside, but I told myself it's what's inside that counts, right? Spoiler, it wasn't any better on the inside. The bouncer barely glanced at me as I awkwardly shuffled through the door, clutching my coat like it was armor. Jimmy, the guy I'd spoken to, was waiting by the bar. He was this skinny dude with a bad goatee and too much cologne. He gave me a grin that made my skin crawl and said, "You nervous? Don't be. Everyone's first day sucks." Fantastic. Real confidence booster. He handed me a clipboard with a contract and house rules. I skimmed it, something about fees, shifts, and how to avoid getting banned for punching customers. That last part stuck with me. After I signed, Jimmy led me to the dressing room, where a few other girls were getting ready. Some of them gave me that, fresh meat look. One of them, a blonde named Destiny, smirked and said, "You ready for this, newbie?" No, not even a little bit. But I faked a smile and said, "Totally." The first stage set came faster than I was ready for. Jimmy told me I was up after the next girl, which didn't leave me enough time to even think. The girl before me, Destiny, moved like she was born on a pole. She did all these crazy spins and splits, and guys were tossing money at her like confetti. Meanwhile, I was standing there in my shaky heels, trying to remember how to walk without falling over. Then it was my turn. The music started some generic club beat, and I took my first step onto the stage. And guess what? I tripped. Yep, first step, and I nearly face-planted right in front of a group of guys who had prime seats at the front. One of them let out this loud laugh, and I could feel my soul leaving my body. I thought about running off the stage, but somehow I kept going. I clutched the pole like it was a lifeline, did a slow spin, which was supposed to be sexy but was definitely not, and just tried not to cry. For the next 2 minutes, I kind of swayed awkwardly, pretending I knew what I was doing. A few guys tossed some singles at me, probably out of pity, but it was something. When the song finally ended, I shuffled off the stage as fast as I could, my heart racing and my face burning with embarrassment. I sat down in the dressing room, ready to quit right then and there. That's when one of the other dancers, a girl named Jade, sat down next to me. She had this calm, no BS vibe, and she handed me a bottle of water. First night, she asked, like she'd seen it 100 times before. I nodded, feeling like I was about to burst into tears. "Don't worry," she said with a shrug. "Everyone sucks their first time. You'll get better. Just takes practice. And better shoes." I actually laughed a little, and that made me feel better. She wasn't wrong about the shoes either. The rest of the night wasn't as bad as the stage set, but it wasn't exactly smooth sailing either. My first lap dance was with this super awkward tech bro who kept apologizing the entire time. "I'm sorry, is this okay? Am I supposed to look at you? Oh God, I don't know what I'm doing." I had no idea what I was doing either, so it felt like we were both struggling through a weird social experiment. At least he tipped well. The second dance of the night was a different story. This guy, mid-40s, wearing way too much cologne, kept trying to slide his hands up my legs. I politely moved them away the first couple of times, but he wasn't getting the hint. Eventually, I stood up and said, "We're done." He got pissed, of course, and started complaining about how I wasn't giving him his money's worth. But Jimmy swooped in, told him to take a hike, and gave me a thumbs up. I appreciated that. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me, My thighs were sore from clinging to the pole, and I was mentally drained from pretending to be confident for hours. But when I counted my tips, I realized I'd made about $200. That was more than I'd made in a week in my old job. Walking out of the club that night, cash stuffed into my bra, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Yeah, the night had been awkward and embarrassing, but I'd survived. I'd faced something that scared the hell out of me, and I came out the other side, legs wobbly, sure, but standing. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back. It got easier. I learned how to move without tripping, how to flirt without cringing, and how to tell which customers were worth my time. I started making real money, enough to pay rent on time and fix my car. I even made a couple of friends among the other dancers, Jade especially. She became my unofficial mentor, teaching me everything from pole tricks to how to avoid getting dragged into drama. I danced for about 8 months before I decided to move on. It wasn't always easy, and there were definitely nights when I questioned what I was doing with my life. But it gave me what I needed: independence, confidence, and the ability to stand on my own 2 feet, even if it took a few falls to get there. Looking back, my first night was an absolute mess, but it was also the start of something that made me stronger. And honestly, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. This one takes place during my senior year, and it all started with a bet that spiraled completely out of control. See, there was this guy named Connor, and Connor was, well, let's just say he lived to push boundaries. If there was a line you weren't supposed to cross, Connor didn't just cross it. He sprinted past it with a smile on his face. This story? Yeah, it's peak Connor. So, it was late April, right around that sweet spot where no one's paying attention anymore. Teachers, students, everyone's just kind of coasting until graduation. One day at lunch, we were sitting outside when Connor made the bet. "You think I could sneak into the faculty meeting next week?" he asked out of nowhere. Now, let me explain. At our school, faculty meetings were this top secret thing. They always happened on Monday afternoons, and they were treated like some kind of sacred ritual. Students were banned from even walking near the conference room when one was going on. It was the one place where the teachers could gossip about students, complain about grades, or talk about whatever weird stuff teachers talk about when we're not around. So naturally, we told Connor there was no way he could pull it off. That was all the encouragement he needed. $20, he said, grinning. "I get in, you all owe me $20. If I get caught, I'll pay you." Now, any normal person would have laughed it off and moved on with their day. But this was Connor, and when Connor made a bet, he committed. Fast forward to the following Monday. The faculty meeting was scheduled for 3:30 sharp, and right around 3:15, Connor went into full heist mode. He'd spent the whole weekend coming up with a perfect disguise: a button-up shirt, khakis, and, of course, a lanyard with a fake ID badge he'd printed out from the library. The badge said substitute teacher, and underneath that his name, Mr. Cornelius. Yeah, he thought it was hilarious. He walked into school that afternoon looking like the most questionable sub you've ever seen. Somehow, no one stopped him. I swear, the only thing keeping this entire plan together was sheer confidence and the fact that no one cared enough to ask questions. Now here's where things get insane. Instead of just sneaking into the back of the meeting, grabbing some proof, and leaving, Connor decided to go all in. He walked right into the room, clipboard in hand, and sat down at the big table like he belonged there. And the teachers? They just accepted it. One of them glanced at him, gave a little nod, and said, "Oh, are you the new sub?" And Connor, without missing a beat, nodded back and said, "Yep, Mr. Cornelius. Nice to meet you." At this point, I thought he was going to slip out as soon as the meeting started, but nope, he stayed. The principal, Mr. Harris, walked in a few minutes later, carrying a giant binder, and sat at the head of the table. "All right, let's get started," he said, completely unaware that there was a random student sitting at his staff meeting in a fake teacher outfit. Connor just sat there, calmly taking fake notes on his clipboard while the teachers went through their agenda. Here's the thing, Connor didn't just blend in. He actually participated. When they started discussing the issue of students being late to class, Connor raised his hand and said, "I've noticed a lot of hallway congestion near the science wing. Maybe we could stagger passing periods?" The teachers agreed with him. By now, he should have been caught. I mean, how did none of these people recognize him? But nope, they just nodded along, jotting down his suggestions like he was an actual authority on high school logistics. I think at one point, one of the math teachers even asked him, How do you deal with that at your other schools? And Connor, without skipping a beat, shrugged and said, well, every school's different, but flexibility is key. The absolute audacity of this guy. He sat through the entire meeting, which lasted almost 45 minutes. 45 minutes? He even grabbed one of the donuts from the snack table and casually sipped coffee like he did this every day. At one point, they went over budget proposals, and Connor actually leaned forward and said, I think a student art showcase could really boost school spirit. And get this, they loved the idea. The principal even wrote it down as an action item for the next meeting. When the meeting finally ended, Connor gave everyone a polite nod, packed up his things, and walked out of the room like he was just heading to his next class. He even slapped one of the other teachers on the back on his way out, saying, see you next week. Now, this is where it gets really good. The next day, the principal sent out an email to the entire school, announcing the new art showcase idea that Mr. Cornelius had suggested at the meeting. The teachers were all raving about it. They were saying things like, it's so refreshing to have a sub who really cares about student engagement, and Mr. Cornelius brings such great energy to the team. Connor? He was dying. None of us could believe he'd pulled it off, let alone with so much success. The teachers were genuinely impressed with him. For a week straight, every time we saw a staff member in the hall, someone would nudge Connor and whisper, there goes your new colleague. He ate it up, of course, and the craziest part? No one ever figured it out. To this day, the teachers still think Mr. Cornelius was a real sub who just never came back. They even tried to reach out to him when they were planning the art showcase, but obviously, the email address on the fake ID badge didn't work. The principal eventually gave up, saying something like, well, wherever Mr. Cornelius is now, we're grateful for his input. Connor won the bet, by the way. We all gave him $20, even though we probably should have spent it on therapy for whatever compels him to pull stuff like that. And that's how a high school senior managed to infiltrate a faculty meeting, change school policy, and become a legend, all under the name of Mr. Cornelius. I still can't believe he got away with it. I've spent a lot of nights lying awake, asking myself how the hell I let this happen. Even now, I still don't have a good answer. All I know is that it did happen, and I can't change it. So, this is about a year and a half ago. I was 24, working a boring office job, and living back at home to save some money. My best friend, Jake, was one of the few people keeping me sane during that time. We'd known each other since middle school, and his family was like my second family. I'd spent more weekends at his house growing up than I can count, playing video games, eating their snacks, and crashing on their couch. Jake's mom, Laura, was always around. She was one of those moms who liked being part of her kids' lives, always cooking, chatting, asking how things were going. And she was attractive. I think everyone noticed that, even back in high school. She wasn't flashy or anything, just effortlessly beautiful. She had that natural glow, always kept in shape, and had this friendly, easygoing vibe that made people gravitate toward her. But to me, she was just Jake's mom. That was the rule. You don't look at your best friend's mom that way. And then one night, everything went sideways. It was a Saturday, and Jake was having a small get-together at his place. Just a handful of us hanging out, drinking beers in the backyard. Laura came out to say hi like she always did. She even joined us for a bit, nursing a glass of wine while we talked and laughed. It wasn't weird. That's just how Laura was, friendly, involved, but never overstepping. Jake ended up calling it a night early because he had to be up for work the next morning. One by one, people trickled out, but I stuck around, finishing my drink and chatting with Laura. I didn't really feel like going home yet, and she didn't seem to mind the company. We sat in the backyard, talking about life, her divorce a few years back, how Jake was doing at work, how I was feeling stuck in my job. It was easy, comfortable. We talked for what felt like hours, and by the time we realized how late it was, we were a couple of drinks deep. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "It's nice having someone to talk to," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. It's been a while since I've felt connected to anyone. There was something in her tone that made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure if it was just the wine or if there was something more going on. I tried to brush it off, saying something generic like, "Well, I'm always here if you need to talk." But then she gave me this look, soft, almost vulnerable. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just friendly. She leaned in a little, resting her hand on my arm, and I froze. My brain was screaming at me to shut it down, to make an excuse and leave. But I didn't move. I couldn't. "You're a good guy," she whispered, her fingers lightly brushing my arm. Before I could even process what was happening, she kissed me. I wish I could say I stopped it right then, that I apologized and left. But I didn't. I kissed her back. It was one of those moments where your brain shuts off completely and you're just running on instinct. The next thing I knew, we were in her living room, tangled up on the couch, and everything spiraled from there. We slept together that night. I remember lying awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. Laura seemed relaxed, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. I, on the other hand, felt like my life was about to implode. I slipped out early the next morning, telling myself it was a one-time mistake. But deep down, I knew better. I knew it wouldn't end there. And it didn't. Laura started texting me a few days later, just casual stuff at first, asking how I was doing, thanking me for staying to talk that night. But the text quickly became more flirty, more suggestive. And, like an idiot, I didn't shut it down. I told myself it was harmless, just a bit of fun, nothing serious. Before long, I was back at her house, and it wasn't just a one-time thing anymore. It became this secret, addictive routine, sneaking around, meeting up whenever Jake wasn't home. We'd spend hours together, talking, laughing, and hooking up like we were in some twisted version of a relationship. Every time I left her house, I told myself it would be the last time. But it never was. I kept going back, knowing full well that if Jake ever found out, it would destroy everything. And then one night it all came crashing down. It was a random Wednesday, and I'd gone over to Laura's place after work. We were in her bedroom when we heard the front door open. My heart stopped. I knew it had to be Jake. He wasn't supposed to be home until later, but there he was, walking through the door. We scrambled to get dressed, but it was too late. Jake walked in, just as I was pulling my shirt over my head, and the look on his face. I'll never forget it. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at us, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. And then, quietly, he said, "Are you kidding me?" I tried to explain, tried to apologize, but what could I possibly say? There was no excuse, no way to make it right. I had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. Jake stormed out, and I followed him, begging him to let me explain. But he wasn't having it. He shoved me away, told me to get out of his life, and that was it. I lost my best friend in an instant. Laura tried to reach out a few times after that, but I ignored her. The whole thing was too messy, too painful. I couldn't keep going down that road, not after what it had cost me. It's been over a year now, and Jake still won't talk to me. I don't blame him. If the roles were reversed, I wouldn't forgive me either. So yeah, that's the story. I lost my best friend over something stupid, something selfish. And the worst part? I knew it was wrong the whole time, but I did it anyway. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some mistakes haunt you forever. And no matter how much time passes, you can't undo what's already been done. Let me tell you about the time I nearly died trying to kill a spider. Yeah, not some exotic venomous thing. Just your run-of-the-mill house spider. You wouldn't think a little 8-legged pest could send you to the afterlife. But life has a funny way of humbling you when you least expect it. It started late one night. I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, when I saw it. This fat little spider chilling on the bathroom wall, just above the light switch. Now, I'm not one of those burn-the-house-down types when I see a spider, but let's just say I prefer not sharing my living space with them. So, I figured I'd do the reasonable thing and squash it before it disappeared somewhere in my room and laid eggs in my shoes. The thing is, I just taken a shower, and the bathroom floor was still kind of wet. But did I take a second to grab a paper towel? Or maybe stand in a stable spot to squish it? Of course not. No, I went in barefoot, on the slippery tiles, armed with nothing but a wad of toilet paper and a stupid amount of confidence. I stood on my tiptoes, leaning up against the wall, trying to get just the right angle to flatten the little sucker. And right as I'm about to land the kill shot, the spider jumps. I didn't even know how spiders could jump, but this one launched itself off the wall like it was training for the Spider Olympics. Naturally, I panicked and swatted at it midair. But that was the beginning of the end. In my panic, my foot slipped on the wet tile, and before I knew what was happening, my whole body went into full ragdoll mode. One leg kicked out to the side, and I came down hard like a cartoon character stepping on a banana peel. My shoulders slammed into the corner of the sink, and my head bounced off the bathroom floor with a crack that felt like someone had just hit me with a frying pan. The second my head hit the tile, everything went fuzzy. I remember lying there, dazed with stars in my vision, trying to process what the hell had just happened. And then, just to make things worse, the toilet paper I'd been holding landed perfectly on my face. So now I'm lying on the bathroom floor, half conscious, covered in soggy toilet paper, wondering if this is the moment my soul leaves my body. I try to sit up, but the room spun like I was on some kind of tilt-a-whirl from hell. My heart was pounding, and my head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I started to panic, thinking, is this a concussion? Am I going to die here? Alone, covered in toilet paper, because of a damn spider. Now, I live alone, so no one was coming to check on me. If I'd passed out right there, that could have been it. I started to imagine the headlines. Local man dies from spider incident. Found with toilet paper on his face. Not exactly the legacy I'd been hoping for. After a few minutes, I managed to sit up, but the back of my head was throbbing, and my shoulder felt like it had been ripped out of its socket. I checked the back of my head for blood. Thankfully, no bleeding, but there was definitely going to be a nasty bump. I sat there for a while, just breathing and trying not to pass out, feeling both embarrassed and weirdly grateful to still be alive. And as if the universe hadn't humiliated me enough, I spotted the spider again. It was just sitting there on the wall like it had been watching the whole thing unfold. I swear if spiders could laugh, this one was cackling. At that point, I didn't even have the energy to go after it again. I just sat there, defeated, and said, "You win, dude." The spider slowly crawled back into the corner, victorious, and I limped out of the bathroom to lay down on the couch, nursing what I was sure was going to be a spectacular bruise on my shoulder. I spent the rest of the night Googling concussion symptoms and second-guessing every little twinge in my head, just waiting for something terrible to happen. Fortunately, I didn't have a concussion, just a bruised ego, a sore shoulder, and the realization that sometimes trying to be the hero over the smallest things can backfire spectacularly. It's wild how fast things can go from zero to "this is how I die." 1 second, you're brushing your teeth. The next, you're sprawled out on the floor, wondering if your entire life just got ended by a bug. Now, I approach spiders with way more respect. If I see one, I leave it alone or call in reinforcements, usually a cup and a piece of paper, because I'm not about to risk round 2. I also keep a mental note to always wear shoes on slippery bathroom floors. Life's too short to die in a battle you didn't need to fight. So, that's my PSA. Don't fight spiders when you're not properly equipped. They might be small, but the real danger isn't them. It's the stupid things you do trying to get rid of them. And if you live alone, maybe text someone before you start going after spiders. Just in case. Stay safe out there, folks. The little things will kill you faster than the big ones. I've been reading my sister's journal for the past 2 years. She has no idea. It started out completely by accident, I swear. I was over at her apartment one day, helping her clean up after a breakup. She was a mess, crying, drinking wine straight out of the bottle, and saying she didn't care if her place ever got cleaned again. So, I started tidying up for her. I was tossing clothes into the laundry and sorting through random papers on her desk when I found this little leather notebook tucked under a stack of bills. I wasn't planning to read it. I just opened it to see what it was, thinking it might be a planner or something. But the second I saw her handwriting and realized it was a journal, curiosity got the best of me. The first page hooked me right away. It wasn't just boring day-to-day stuff. It was raw, emotional, like a peek inside her soul. She wrote about her ex-boyfriend, about how the relationship had fallen apart, about feeling worthless and lost. I knew she'd been struggling, but I had no idea how deep it went until I saw her words on the page. I only read a few entries that day, just enough to understand how much pain she was hiding from everyone. I should have stopped there. I told myself I would, but I didn't. The next time I was at her place, I looked for the journal again. She kept it in the same spot, like she thought no one would ever find it. And just like that, I was back inside her head, reading her most private thoughts. I knew it was wrong, but it felt like I couldn't help myself. I justified it by telling myself I was only reading to make sure she was okay, that I was looking out for her. But But the truth is, part of me liked knowing things she wasn't telling anyone, not even me. It became a habit. Every time I visited her, I'd find an excuse to slip into her room and check the journal. I didn't even have to read a lot, just a few pages here and there to keep up with what was going on in her mind. It was like binge watching someone's life, except no one else knew the show existed. I found out things she never told anyone. How much she hated her job, how she was considering moving to another city but didn't know how to tell our parents, how she'd hooked up with her ex one more time even though she knew it was a bad idea. The worst part is, I started using what I read to shape our conversations. If she wrote that she was feeling insecure about something, I'd bring it up in a casual, supportive way like, you're way too hard on yourself. If she mentioned needing a break from socializing, I'd conveniently suggest a quiet night in the next time we made plans. She thought I was being the perfect sister, but really, I was just cheating. I wasn't being there for her. I was manipulating the situation using information she didn't know I had. And it worked. She started confiding in me more, opening up about things she normally wouldn't. Every time she told me something she'd already written in the journal, I'd nod along, acting surprised, like I was hearing it for the first time. But inside, I felt guilty. I knew I was crossing a line, but I kept telling myself it was harmless. Until I found the entry about me. It was buried a few months back, mixed in with a bunch of other stuff, so I almost missed it. But when I saw my name, my heart dropped. She wrote about how much she loved me, but felt like I was becoming too clingy, too involved in her life. She said she appreciated how supportive I was, but sometimes it felt like I was suffocating her, like I was always one step ahead of her thoughts and emotions. And it was starting to creep her out. She wondered if maybe I sensed things about her on some weird subconscious level, or if I just paid too much attention. She had no idea I was reading her journal. That entry wrecked me. For the first time, I realized how deeply I'd messed up. I wasn't helping her. I was invading her privacy, betraying her trust in a way she could never imagine. I thought I was being a good sister, but really, I was just feeding my own need to feel close to her no matter the cost. I told myself I'd stop. I even promised myself I'd never open the journal again. But the next time I went over to her place, I found myself reaching for it, almost on autopilot. I didn't even think about it. It was just muscle memory at that point. And the second I opened it, I knew I was trapped. Now, every time I read it, I feel this crushing mix of guilt and relief. I hate that I can't stop, but I also hate the idea of not knowing what's going on in her head. What if she's struggling again and doesn't tell me? What if something happens and I could have helped if I just read one more entry? I feel like I'm caught in this loop, lying to myself that I'm doing it for her when really, I know it's just for me. I've thought about coming clean, telling her everything. But how do you say, hey, I've been secretly reading your deepest thoughts for 2 years? She'd never forgive me. She'd be devastated. And honestly, I don't think she'd ever trust me again. So, I carry the secret alone. Every time she texts me or we hang out, I feel this gnawing guilt in the back of my mind. I wonder if she can sense it, if she knows on some level that I've been lying to her all this time. But she doesn't. She just smiles and laughs, completely unaware that the sister she trusts the most is the one betraying her. I know I have to stop. I know I need to leave that journal alone and let her have her privacy. But every time I try, I feel this overwhelming anxiety, like I'm losing some invisible lifeline between us. It's sick, I know, but I can't seem to stop. Maybe one day, I'll work up the courage to tell her the truth. Or maybe I'll just carry this secret with me forever, hoping she never finds out. Either way, I know I'll never forgive myself for what I've done. But for now, I'm still reading, and I hate myself for it. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share something like this, but it's been eating at me for a long time. I've tried to convince myself it didn't happen, that it was a dream, or maybe just my brain playing tricks on me. But every time I close my eyes, I'm right back there. It happened about a year ago. I was driving home late at night, coming back from visiting a friend who lives a couple of towns over. It was one of those nights where the highway is completely empty, not a single car in sight, and everything feels unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. I was about halfway home, driving along a stretch of road surrounded by dense forest, when I saw something strange up ahead, a light in the middle of the road. It was a soft bluish glow, not bright enough to be a street lamp or headlights. At first, I thought it was maybe a car parked on the side with its interior light on, or maybe someone's phone flashlight. But as I got closer, I realized there was no car. Just the light, floating in the middle of the road. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen. It hovered about 3 feet off the ground, flickering like a dying firefly. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. My headlights hit the thing directly, but it didn't cast a shadow. It was just there, hovering, flickering, almost as if it was watching me. I should have kept driving. I know that now. But something about the light was weirdly mesmerizing. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there, staring at it. For a second, I thought about getting out of the car, but my gut told me to stay put. Something felt off, really off. And then the light moved. It didn't float away or drift like you'd expect. It snapped to the side of the road like it teleported. 1 second it was in front of me, the next it was 50 feet away, flickering in the same soft, eerie way. My heart started pounding. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, but I was frozen, my hands locked on the steering wheel. Then the weirdest thing happened. My car radio, off the entire drive, suddenly switched on. Just static at first, hissing and crackling, but underneath the noise, I swear I could hear something. Not a song or a voice, but words, garbled like someone talking underwater. I leaned forward, turning the volume up slightly, and that's when I heard it clearly. It was my own voice. It was saying something I didn't remember ever saying. Just fragments of sentences, things that sounded vaguely familiar, but out of context. I shouldn't have come here, and it's too late, and they're watching. It was like listening to a distorted recording of thoughts I hadn't even had yet. At that moment, the light flickered brighter, and the car's engine shut off just like that. No sputtering, no warning. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The dashboard went dark, the radio cut out, and I was left sitting there in complete silence, except for the flickering of that strange bluish light. Panic set in. I fumbled with the keys, trying to restart the car, but the engine wouldn't even click. It was completely dead. I glanced toward the light, and it was closer now, hovering just outside the driver's side window. My skin prickled like every hair on my body was standing on end. I could feel it watching me, even though it had no shape, no eyes, just this cold, pulsing awareness. I did the only thing I could think of. I locked the doors. Stupid, I know, but it was instinct. The second I hit the lock button, the light vanished. Not drifted away, vanished like someone flipping off a light switch. And then, just as suddenly as it had died, the car roared back to life. I didn't waste a second. I threw it into drive and floored it, speeding down the highway like a bat out of hell. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. I didn't look back, not even once. I drove straight home without stopping, parked the car in the driveway, and sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The weirdest part? When I checked the clock on the dashboard, only 5 minutes had passed since I pulled over. But I swear, it felt like I'd been sitting there for hours. The time just didn't add up. I even checked my phone when I got inside, and it matched the car clock perfectly. 5 minutes. That was all. I've tried to forget about it, but I can't. Every time I drive down that stretch of road now, I feel like the light is still out there, waiting. I haven't seen it again, but I know it's there. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, I'll hear that same static from the radio, just for a second. Like it's reminding me that it's still watching. And the worst part? Sometimes I wonder if it let me go, or if I never really left at all. This happened to me 2 summers ago, and even now I have trouble believing it actually happened. I've tried rationalizing it 100 different ways, telling myself it was just exhaustion, or maybe my brain playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. My cousin Nate had invited me and a couple of our mutual friends to go stay at his family's lake house, way out in the boonies. This place wasn't some cutesy vacation spot with paddleboards and Wi-Fi. It was old and isolated, surrounded by miles of forest and sitting right on the edge of a massive, murky lake. No neighbors, no cell service, just a dock, a tiny boat, and whatever fish we were lucky enough to catch. I was pumped. A weekend of drinking beers, fishing, and swimming sounded like exactly what I needed. We got there on a Friday evening. The place looked just as run down as Nate had warned. Peeling paint, creaky wooden steps, and a sagging roof. But it had charm. It felt like a relic from another time. The kind of place where generations of families must have gathered over the years, filling it with stories and memories. The first night was great. We sat out on the dock, drinking cheap beer and watching the sunset bleed into the water. After it got dark, we built a fire and swapped stories until we were too tired to keep our eyes open. The stars out there were incredible. So many of them, it felt like the whole sky was cracked open. The weird stuff didn't start until the next day. We spent most of Saturday morning fishing, but the fish weren't biting, so we decided to take the boat out and explore the far side of the lake. There was this old dock over there that Nate said had been abandoned for years. He said his dad told him not to mess around with it, but, well, we were in our 20s, so of course that meant we had to check it out. The dock was a mess, boards rotting, half of it submerged in the water, the whole thing leaning to one side like it was about to collapse. The forest crept right up to the edge of it, thick and dark, casting long shadows over the water. We tied up the boat and climbed onto the dock, laughing and daring each other to jump off the shakiest parts. But as soon as I stepped off the boat, I felt strange. It was like the air got heavier, thicker, like there was something wrong with the place. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe the eerie setting getting to me. But it was more than that. I could feel it in my bones, this nagging sensation that we shouldn't be there. Then we found the cabin. It was tucked just behind the tree line, barely visible from the water. The thing looked ancient. Its windows were broken, the door was missing, and the roof had caved in on one side. It felt wrong in a way that's hard to explain. Not just abandoned, but forgotten, like the forest had been slowly swallowing it up, trying to erase any trace that it had ever existed. Nate, being Nate, thought it was hilarious. "We gotta check it out," he said, grinning like a kid. The rest of us weren't so sure, but we followed him anyway. What else were we going to do? The inside of the cabin was worse than the outside. There were old, rotting pieces of furniture scattered around, a table with one leg missing, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. The walls were warped from years of moisture, and the air smelled like mold and something else, something sour and metallic. In the corner of the room, there was a small wooden trapdoor, half hidden under a pile of broken chairs. Nate, of course, went straight for it. "Don't," I said, but he just gave me a look. "What, you scared?" I was. I didn't know why, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But Nate pried the trapdoor open before I could stop him. It was a small, square hole, leading down into complete darkness. The smell that came out of it was foul, like wet dirt and something long dead. Nate laughed, but it was nervous. "You guys dare me to go down there?" None of us answered. That's when we heard it. At first, it sounded like the wind, this low, faint whistle coming from somewhere deep in the hole. But as we stood there, frozen, the sound got louder. And that's when I realized it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, whispering. None of us moved. We just stood there, staring into that black hole, listening to the faint whispers rising from the dark. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a conversation, a dozen voices, maybe more, all speaking at once. And then the whispers stopped. For a moment, everything was dead silent. Even the birds outside had gone quiet. And then from deep down in the darkness, we heard it, a soft, deliberate knock. 3 knocks, like something was knocking from inside the hole. Nate slammed the trapdoor shut, and we bolted. I've never run so fast in my life. We sprinted back to the boat, tripping over ourselves in our panic, and didn't stop until we were back on the water, rowing like our lives depended on it. We didn't say a word the whole way back to the lake house. When we finally got there, we packed up our stuff in record time and left. No fire, no beers, no goodbyes. Just silence. I haven't seen Nate or the others much since that trip. We don't talk about what happened out there. I think we're all trying to pretend it didn't happen, like if we don't talk about it, it'll go away. But I know it won't. And sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I can still hear those whispers. And every now and then, I hear that knock. 3 knocks. We were together for 3 years, and in the beginning, it was everything you'd expect. Late night talks, weekend getaways, and that head over heels kind of love where you can't get enough of each other. He made me feel safe, like I'd finally found someone who would be there through thick and thin. I thought we were building something real, something that would last. And for a while, it really felt that way. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly, disguised as small changes, little shifts that are easy to dismiss. And that's exactly what happened with us. It started with the phone. It always does, doesn't it? We used to be so casual about it. If mine was charging, I'd grab his to look something up, and vice versa. But one day, without warning, his phone became off-limits. He started keeping it on silent, face down, and always tucked in his pocket like it was carrying the world's most sensitive secrets. If I glanced at his screen when it buzzed, he'd lock it immediately, giving me this weird, guilty smile. I laughed it off at first. "What, you working for the CIA now?" I joked one night when he grabbed his phone the second it lit up. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know how work is," he mumbled and slipped it into his back pocket. It stung, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Everyone needs privacy, right? I didn't want to be that controlling girlfriend who snoops or demands to know everything. But something about it still didn't sit right with me. Then came the nights out. He started going out more often. Happy hours with coworkers, poker nights with old friends, all things that on the surface seemed normal. But the frequency increased. "Don't wait up," he'd say as he kissed me on the forehead, walking out the door with his hair perfectly styled and a new shirt I hadn't seen before. At first, I didn't mind. I wanted him to have his own life, to see his friends. But the way he'd come back late, sometimes well after midnight, started to gnaw at me. He'd slip into bed reeking of alcohol and perfume, and when I asked how the night went, his answers were short and vague. "It was fine. You know, the usual." The usual. Those two words became his shield, a way to shut down any conversation before it even started. But what really got to me was how distant he became. It was like he'd put up an invisible wall between us, one I couldn't climb no matter how hard I tried. We used to talk for hours about everything, our plans, our dreams, silly little things that made us laugh. But now, he barely looked at me when we were together. We'd sit in the same room, but it felt like miles separated us. And the intimacy? It vanished without warning. No more spontaneous kisses, no more playful touches. I'd reach for him in bed, only to be met with excuses. "I'm just tired," or "work has me drained." He'd roll over, leaving me to lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. Then the accusations started. Out of nowhere, he began questioning me. "You've been on your phone a lot lately. Who are you talking to?" he asked one day, half joking, half serious. I was so taken aback that I laughed. "What are you talking about?" "It's just my group chat with the girls." But the questions didn't stop. Every time I went out with friends, he'd make little comments. "So, who was really there? Or did anyone hit on you?" He said it with a smile, but there was an edge to his voice that unsettled me. It was like he was waiting for me to slip up, to give him a reason to accuse me of something I hadn't done. One night, after another one of his late returns, I decided to confront him. I couldn't take the distance, the secrecy, the constant second-guessing. "Is there someone else?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. His reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, his face twisted in anger. "You think I'm cheating? You're unbelievable." I tried to stay calm, but tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "I just feel like you've been pulling away," I whispered. "I don't know what's going on with you anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I've just been stressed, okay? Work's been crazy. I'm sorry if I've been distant, but it has nothing to do with you." And for a moment, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly to think that we were just going through a rough patch and that things would go back to the way they were. But they didn't. The night, everything fell apart. He told me he was going out with friends again. He kissed me goodbye, and I watched him leave, that familiar sinking feeling in my chest heavier than ever. This time, I couldn't let it go. I waited until I knew he'd be out for a while, and then I did something I'd never done before. I checked his laptop. My hands shook as I opened it, telling myself over and over that I'd find nothing, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't. There they were, messages between him and another woman. Not just friendly texts, but full-blown conversations about meeting up, about how much they missed each other, about the nights they'd spent together. My heart shattered as I scrolled through the endless stream of betrayal. When he came home that night, I was waiting for him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just showed him the messages and asked, "How long?" He stood there, silent, knowing there was no way out of this. "A few months," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear the answer. He shrugged, looking at the floor. "I don't know. It just happened. Just happened." As if cheating was something you accidentally trip and fall into. I packed my things that night. I didn't give him the chance to explain further or beg for forgiveness. I knew that whatever excuses he gave wouldn't change the fact that he'd made the choice to betray me over and over again. It's been months since that night, and I'm still picking up the pieces. Some days are better than others. But the trust? That's gone. I question everything now. Every look, every word, every interaction. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When something feels off, listen. Don't wait for the lies to unravel. Don't convince yourself that you're being paranoid. If someone loves you, they won't make you feel like you have to play detective in your own relationship. Next time, I'll trust my gut. Because the truth is, it always knew. I was just too scared to hear it.